Hey everyone, hope you're all doing great. Welcome back to the Anime Fictions 2.0. Today, we're diving into part 4 of What If Naruto selected for Team 8. If you're enjoying these alternate timelines, make sure to hit that subscribe button, share it with your friends, and check out the other videos on the channel. And of course, drop your thoughts in the comments. I always love hearing your ideas. Alright, enough talk, let's get into the story. Naruto flew backwards, his ears ringing from the heavy blow. Arching his back, he managed to get his hands and feet in front of him before he smacked into a tree trunk with stunning force. Bits of bark shot into the air, and he barely managed to concentrate enough chakra to stick his hands and feet to the wood before he fell. That freaky grass genin was strong. He shook his head to clear it, scanning the clearing for his teammates and allies. They'd only been traveling an hour before things started to get hairy. They'd avoided one team by using some forest leeches as a distraction, and were circling around to ambush them when Shino's colony sensed the pheromones of a single Kakai bug approaching at high speed. His super sneaky teammate planted his Kakai on all the other participants, but they should have been together in groups of 3. Whether a lone competitor was a threat or an opportunity, they decided to see who it was. Whatever it was that they had expected to see, it hadn't been Kiba being chased by a giant snake. Shino could see that the Inuzuka was clearly winded, and the snake was gaining on him. As the monstrous reptile reared up to strike, Naruto came in from the side, tackling Kiba out of the way. Unfortunately, Akamaru went flying from the sudden change in momentum. But Hinata was a heartbeat behind, and caught the tumbling canine with little more than a startled yelp. The snake, angry at being robbed of its meal, turned to pursue them, but that mistake proved fatal. Shino dropped out of the trees above the snake, his arms trailing behind him. His hands flexed and a long baton of dull black metal shot out of each sleeve of his jacket. He caught the ends with the sureness of intensive practice, and there was a distinct click as narrow, slightly curved blades folded out of each baton. They locked at a right angle to what were now the shafts of the modified kamas, the razor-sharp metal pointing downward. With his arms above his plummeting body, they resembled scythe-like wings. Shino's sandals landed on the back of the snake's head, but before it could even register his presence, the blades continued their trajectory, curving into tight arcs as he straightened, his arms snapping downward. The blades buried themselves in the snake's eyes, ramming deep into the creature's brain. The carcass slammed down, skidding on the ground. Shino extracted his weapons with a sharp jerk, cleaning the blades on the grass before folding them up again. By this time, his teammates had circled back into the clearing with their prisoner, though by this time Kiba had reclaimed his dog. But not before it had licked Hinata's face several times, to her visible embarrassment. Naruto let out a low whistle before speaking. "Is that what Masato-sama was teaching you?" he asked, clearly impressed. Shino nodded as he slid the hafts of his weapons into his sleeves again. With an audible click, the spring-loaded holders locked them into place. "You have the coolest parents," Naruto muttered as Kiba got his breath back and began to explain. He'd been separated from the rest of Team 7 by some freaky wind attack, only to find himself on some monster snake's dinner menu. As he talked, he began to lead him back to where he'd been attacked. As they approached the clearing where Team 7 had been separated, Akamaru began to bark and Shino started scanning the greenery around them. "Something is wrong," the boy murmured. "My colonies are sensing a large amount of chakra being expended up ahead." "Akamaru senses it too," Kiba added as he patted the puppy that was now burrowing down into his jacket. Up above, Hinata whispered, her Byakugan gleaming with the bits of late afternoon sun that filtered down past the leaves. Shoving a bit of chakra into his legs, Naruto leapt into the canopy in a single bound, the others less than a step behind. Entering a potentially hostile situation at ground level was to be avoided whenever possible. Iruka-sensei's lectures on tactics seemed so boring back at the academy. Now, it was all Naruto could do to keep the remains of his last meal down. Landing on a thick bough in a stealthy crouch, Naruto scanned the branches. Sasuke and Sakura were there, still alive too. On the other hand, Sakura looked like she'd seen better days and Sasuke had a bloody wound on his thigh. He ignored the slight twinge in his stomach and examined the third person, who was standing on a separate bough. The hidden grass genin stared right at him with a look that was simultaneously bored and contemptuous. Naruto hadn't made more than a whisper of sound when he landed, but he'd still been detected. He swallowed as the stranger's eyes bored into his with a mixture of mild annoyance and more killing intent than even Sabaku no Gaara generated. There was no way this creep was a normal genin. More insects here to interfere? He had murmured in a peculiarly androgynous voice. I'll have to talk to my friend about his performance. I sent him to kill one, and instead for come back. Very disappointing, but I'm only interested in testing Sasuke's potential. I'm afraid you'll all just have to die. Maybe Sasuke would like to watch, Just like before. Sasuke launched forward a fraction of a second before Naruto. The Uchiha threw a rapid flurry of punches that the genin blocked with a single hand. The instant before Naruto's fist connected with the back of the freak's head, the other arm whipped around in a backhanded blow that sent him flying into a tree trunk. By the time Naruto had regained his bearings, Sasuke was stumbling backwards from the freak's counterattack. Naruto frowned. Since when were Sasuke's eyes red? The grass ninja's follow-up was interrupted by a spread of kunai thrown by Kiba. Shino was circling around the fight, no doubt spreading his Kikai bugs, but Hinata was darting in toward the enemy's rear, her hands up for a Juken strike. Naruto almost shouted for her to stop, but he had to trust that she knew what she was doing. Instead, he put his hands together into the ram's seal and summoned a score of Kage Bunshin, spread around the nearby branches. They instantly began circling as well, waiting for an opening. Hinata almost made it, but at the last second the freaky genin pivoted and drove a back kick into her stomach, driving her off her feet so fast she didn't even have a chance to hit any of the on his leg. Fortunately, one of Naruto's clones was close enough to catch her, and pivoting, tossed her to a second clone on a higher branch right before the freak's follow-up spin kick drove through the first clone's chest, making it explode. Kage Bunshin? The weirdo said in a voice that was really getting on Naruto's nerves. Maybe you aren't as boring as you look. Get out of here! Sasuke yelled, all of you. He's way above our level. I don't think it will be that simple, Shino said as he threw a pair of kunai. At first, they looked to be underthrown, but when they embedded in the wood to either side of the grass ninja's feet, they each had an explosive tag that was already flaring. The explosion filled the air with smoke, but not flying body parts as Naruto had hoped. He couldn't even smell any blood. When the smoke cleared, the bow was gone, but in its place was an even larger snake, with the grass nin standing on top of its head. Oh hell no! Kiba yelled. You have got to be kidding me. Sasuke looked like he was about to explode. He kept glancing at his teammates, then shook his head and his eyes faded back into their normal black color. Fine, he snapped, as he pulled something out of his pouch. You want our scroll, you can have it. No! Kiba yelled. Even Sakura looked dismayed. This is not worth us all getting killed like Tizuna, Sasuke snarled. I suppose that goes for us as well, Naruto said, slinging his backpack off his shoulders and rummaging around in it. He knew Hinata and Shino were staring at him, but he just ignored them for the moment. It took a little digging, since he had their scroll in the very bottom of the bag for safekeeping. He even had to get one of his clones to step around the tree and help him for a moment. All the while the grass freak had this amused little smirk on his face, one that made Naruto's knuckles itch. But now was not the time to scratch them on his way too pretty to be a guy face. Meanwhile, Kiba and Sasuke had gotten into a heated argument, one that culminated in Kiba grabbing the scroll away from Sasuke and tossing it back over his shoulder to Sakura. Amazingly enough, she didn't immediately hand it over to her crush. When Sasuke started to argue again, Kiba told him to shut up and use the index and middle fingers of his right hand to doink him on the forehead. Sasuke went completely rigid when the slightly taller Inuzuka did this, and for a moment Naruto thought he was going to go after his teammate. Instead, he turned away with a glare. Fine, Naruto announced in a loud voice. My team was just passing by. Here's our scroll. We can go now, right? He carefully tossed the scroll to the grass genin. That is the way of prey, the weirdo said in response as it weighed the scroll in its hand. When confronted by a predator, they offer up something in their place, hoping to be left alone. But there is no guarantee that you will do that, is there? Shino asked in a very chill tone. Hinata had regained her breath and moved away from his clone. She was frowning at Naruto, and that bugged him more than a little. No, there isn't, the grass ninja agreed with a leer. Good, Naruto announced brightly. Then I won't feel bad about this. With a poof, the outer seal on the heaven scroll disappeared, revealing explosive tags wrapped around a blank scroll. They promptly exploded, enveloping the creepy shinobi in a ball of fire. The enormous snake let out a hiss that sounded like a boiler explosion and lunged for Naruto's branch. Naruto timed his leap for the last second and managed to vault over the snake's head and land on its neck, chakra gluing the soles of his sandals to the undulating scales. No sooner did he land than he was in the middle of a hurricane of fists and feet. Effeminate or not, that weirdo still hit as hard as Gai-sensei. Naruto blocked as best he could, but the blows that slipped past to clip his head were making his ears ring. Finally, a kick to the stomach knocked him loose from the snake, and the instant his feet lost contact the snake was rearing back to swallow him. Naruto barely had time to use a substitution technique with one of his clones to keep from being swallowed. About half his clones were gone now, most of them crushed by the snake thrashing around. As he created more, he saw Kiba and Akamaru make some kind of spiraling wind attack that gouged into the snake's belly scales. Elsewhere, Sakura was throwing kunai at the eyes of the giant reptile, without much luck. Sasuke, surprisingly enough, had decided to fight once more. He'd thrown some kind of weird shuriken trailing wires around the snake. Not only were they starting to cut into the thick scales, but he was swinging around the snake's body, pelting the grass shinobi with fireballs as he swung overhead. Shino wasn't immediately visible, but a wide section of the snake's scales were beginning to gleam wetly with blood, making Naruto shudder as he recalled Shino mentioning carnivorous strains of Kikai bugs. The grass freak managed to sidestep the worst of the fireballs as Sasuke flashed overhead, so Naruto sent a brace of shuriken his way to keep him off balance. A trio of his clones contributed as well, even though they were quickly dispelled. He noticed that the ninja's left hand, which had been holding the scroll, appeared to be horribly burned, with the skin sloughing off in places, but it didn't seem to slow him down at all. On Sasuke's next trip around the snake, his wires had wrapped around the thick body, pulling him low enough that he managed to put both feet into the side of the grass ninja's head. For once, their enemy's eyes widened a little as it was knocked off of the snake and into freefall. Hinata darted forward out from under cover, leaping at the freak's back, right hand pulled back for what could well be a lethal juken strike. Naruto leapt forward as the snake's tail caught Kiba and Akamaru right after they'd gouged a wide trench in the armor-like scales on its underbelly. Two of his clones shot down after them, hopefully in time to break their fall. There was a visible flash as Hinata sent a massive burst of chakra into the center of their enemy's back. Naruto tried not to think of the mess that must have been made out of the freak's insides. The grass shinobi arched his back, but instead of signifying death throes, it was just a prelude to him reaching back with one inhumanly flexible arm and grabbing Hinata's shoulder. Still in freefall, he hurled the kunoichi at the tree trunk they were falling past. The recoil allowed him to land on a branch, while Hinata struck the tree with a sickening thud. She fell limply away from the trunk, leaving a splotch of blood on the weathered bark. One of Naruto's clones caught her, but she hung limp in the horrified Bunshin's arms. Naruto let out a scream of rage just as the snake reared up and swallowed him. Shino watched as Sasuke leapt after the imposter, his movements even faster than before. Not only was he moving with greater speed, he seemed to anticipate his opponent's actions by a fraction of a second. After flipping backward to escape his opponent's counter, the Yukika came to rest on a higher branch for a moment, facing in Shino's direction. The gleam of red in his eyes indicated that the class genius had managed to activate his bloodline, the Sharingan. His first colony had managed to get several Kikai onto their opponent, while his attention was otherwise occupied. However, the anomalous genin didn't even seem to notice the chakra they'd managed to drain from him. This meant that either their opponent was another, which was highly unlikely, or it was a very advanced shinobi, of at least upper rank. His second colony was working its way towards where he estimated the enormous reptile's vital organs would be located. But their rate of progress did not bode well for a timely end. As it was, without its master guiding it, it did little more than thrash about, trying to shake them off without much success. His eyes also tracked the progress of the Kage Bunshin carrying his teammate Hinata. She wasn't moving and the clone's face seemed unusually grave. Shino frowned. He was the last member of teammates still in the fight, but his efforts thus far had met with limited success. Good, the grass shinobi murmured as he blocked another combo from the Uchiha heir. Your skills have progressed nicely, all things considered. The overly familiar tone of voice seemed to be calculated to induce discomfort and fear. Shino merely found it to be a childish affectation. Finally, Sasuke began to show signs of fatigue and his attacks slowed. Shino wondered if he'd ever had to spar someone as inexhaustible as Naruto. The grass ninja grabbed Sasuke's arm and twisted, locking the joint. His other hand drew back for a strike as Shino soundlessly descended. The Aburame boy felt a twinge of annoyance as their enemy jerked his head aside an instant before the blade of his kama transited the space it had been occupying. Displaying an inhuman degree of flexibility, the shinobi flipped backwards. Yet another insect interferes with my test, it sneered in an insinuating tone. Your statement implies that it is supposed to be an insult, Shino said as he stepped forward, beginning one of his mother's intermediate attack patterns. The grass ninja stepped back smoothly, dodging each blow almost as soon as it was launched. He supposed one might consider this frustrating, but he did not deviate from the kata. Overextending a strike in an attempt to catch his elusive foe would only give him an opening to launch a counteroffensive. Instead, Shino stuck with the pattern, the whirling blades giving no opening to his enemy as he steadily forced the unarmed shinobi backward. So those annoying little creatures are yours? He asked. Well, it's easy to deal with such infestations. With that he leapt backward and up, bringing his hands up to his mouth at the apogee of his flight, and sending a dense stream of fire down at Shino. Shino crossed his weapons in front of himself, and pushed as much chakra into them as he could in an attempt to duplicate one of his mother's more advanced techniques. The kamas glowed pale blue for a moment before they were engulfed in flames. However, his hands were not burned and the stream of fire seemed to part around him. When it was over, the wood on either side of him was smoldering, but he was untouched. He did, however, fall to one knee as the sudden expenditure of chakra had left him drained and weakened. For all that, he'd only barely repelled the fire technique. As soon as he landed, the grass shinobi was charging again. Shino took a deep breath as he regained his feet, but his foe was intercepted by Sasuke, who flung a double handful of shuriken. They arced out in a seemingly random pattern, none of them coming close to their target, unless one noticed the wires trailing behind them. Before the grass shinobi knew what was happening, he'd been bound to an adjacent tree trunk and the Uchiha fired off a massive stream of flames that raced down the wires to engulf his enemy. Shino felt his eyebrows rise over the tops of his glasses. The Katon had actually burned a hole completely through the 5-meter-thick trunk, leaving their foe little more than a smoldering corpse. And then the corpse darkened and slumped into a pile of mud and Shino felt something strike his back, sending him flying through the air. He held onto his weapons though, and despite acute shortness of breath was able to hook one blade into a passing branch and swing his body up. He landed carefully, then deliberately took a deep breath, wincing as tender ribs flexed. But he was still combat effective, so he waved off Naruto's clones as they moved to help. Most of the remaining Bunshin were circling around Sasuke and the grass shinobi. Occasionally one would see an opportunity and attack, but most of them were destroyed without landing a blow. Given the extent of Naruto's taijutsu training, Shino found this worrisome. When Sasuke was knocked clear again, all the clones dogpiled the grass shinobi, only to have it use an advanced variation on the substitution technique. In this case, the enemy's body was replaced by a log festooned with explosive tags. The ensuing conflagration destroyed most of the remaining clones. With no immediate sign of their foe, Shino and Sasuke both headed toward Sakura's perch, a wide bough where the last clones had deposited Hinata, as well as Kiba and Akamaru. All three were unconscious. As they circled around the still thrashing snake, Sasuke spoke up. Do you think we should, try to recover his body? I don't think that will be necessary, Shino answered. Sasuke turned to glare at Shino as they landed on the wide bough. His clones are still here, Shino murmured. Sasuke's eyes widened slightly and he turned to look at the snake as Shino knelt by his teammate. Hinata had a split lip, a bloody nose, and the whole side of her face was bruised. At best she'd have a mild concussion. Shino looked up at the worried clone hovering protectively over her. She's badly hurt, Shino said in a flat voice. If this battle goes on much longer she may die. Which was the literal truth, the young Hyuga was in no condition to defend herself. The clone spun toward the snake, its features drawn into a rictus of fury. It had barely taken a step forward before Shino stabbed it in the back with his kamas. The clone dispersed before it could even change expressions. What the hell was that for? Sakura asked, outraged. Standing this close, he could see how watery her eyes were, and wondered if she'd thought things through. Naruto told me something interesting at dinner last night, was all Shino could say before the grass shinobi dropped onto the branch beside them. The bug user barely had time to turn before a two-handed combination sent him skidding along the rough bark. But even as he tried to roll with the blow, his colonies registered a massive chakra spike nearby. Sakura felt worse than useless, pulling out her last kunai and taking a wobbly defensive stance over her unconscious classmates. She knew when it was her turn she wouldn't last nearly as long as Shino, who was only now coming to a halt in a small blizzard of bark chips. Sasuke and the weird grass guy were moving so fast she could only see blurs now. It was amazing that Sasuke-kun was even holding him off this long. That was when the giant snake's head exploded. A sudden wave of something washed over her, and she felt her hands trembling. In spite of herself, she found her head turning toward that sickening crunch. Surprisingly, so did the two battling not 10 meters from where she stood. A section of scaly skin at least 2 meters wide was missing. She could just make out a fist sticking up, coated in thick red fluid, with chunks. Before her gorge could finish rising, the whole snake's body began to glow brightly, and then exploded, just like one of Naruto's clones. Sakura flinched away from the explosion, just in time to see that grass weirdo take advantage of the distraction to attack Sasuke-kun. A huge snake shot out of his sleeve and wrapped around Sasuke's torso, trapping his arms. The massive body flexed, and Sasuke dropped to his knees as the air was forced out of his lungs. Sakura was about to charge forward, hoping her sacrifice would buy Sasuke enough time to escape, when a reddish blur shot past her. "Get away from them!" Something shouted in little more than a guttural roar. Sakura felt her knees turn to water as something, some instinct, made her want to turn and run until she died of exhaustion. Sakura blinked. Standing in front of her was a rather rumpled-looking Naruto. He was facing away from her, but the hands fisted at his sides were trembling with what had to be rage. There was a loud crack and the grass genin went flying backwards to slam into the tree trunk hard enough to make an impression on the wood. The genin flexed its arms and the wood literally exploded around it. "Those eyes," it murmured. "So that's what happened to it." "Shut up, you bastard!" Naruto growled. Sakura rubbed at her eyes, but there was nothing wrong with them. Naruto was not only wrapped up in enough chakra to see, but it was red. What the hell would make him have red chakra? Was it some weird blood limit she hadn't heard about? Inner Sakura, the more assertive voice inside her head, demanded to know how Naruto, of all people, could have a blood limit. Then again, Kiba said he'd heard Team 8 had been in an incredible fight on their patrol mission. As if to prove the point, Naruto charged forward, punching and kicking in a blur of motion. He was moving even faster than before, and this time he was holding his own, at least for the moment. Snapped out of her daze, she spun towards Sasuke-kun, gripping her last kunai. The last Uchiha in Konoha was getting red in the face as the snake continued to squeeze. It hadn't even tried to bite him. It seemed more like it was playing with him, holding Sasuke down for its weirdo master. But it spun and snapped at her as she approached, the sharp fangs missing her by inches. "Sasakura," Sasuke gasped. "Get out of here. Just go," he said in a wheezing voice. Sakura's eyes widened. Did he think she'd just leave him like this? Who did he think she was? Did he think she was a coward? But his voice didn't seem angry or disappointed, just worried. Afraid. Not of the snake either. But maybe for her. On one hand, such a realization warmed her slightly, and gave her hopes for the future. On the other hand, Inner Sakura was pissed. Did he think she was that useless? Sakura scowled, shifting the kunai so it lay under her wrist. She held out her free hand, taunting the snake. This was no different than the slapping game Ino had taught her when they were young. The python took the bait, and lunged at her free hand, even as Sasuke tried to jerk backwards to stop it. Sakura pivoted at the hips, drawing back the empty hand even as the other one shot forward. The kunai slammed down through the top of the snake's head with a sickening crunch. In a flash, Sasuke was free of the loosening coils. Sakura spared him a glare as he raced past her, trying not to think too hard about what she'd just done. Throwing up would rather spoil the effect. "Thanks," Sasuke murmured as he charged back into the fight. As the summoned snake disappeared, Sakura scooped up her now free blade, which she decided was her lucky kunai. Then she spun to follow her Sasuke-kun into battle. No matter how angry he was, no matter how much of the freaky red chakra he used, Naruto couldn't seem to get a clean shot at this grass bastard. The freak's taijutsu was very different from Gai-sensei's Goken, but it was effective nonetheless. It was hard to stay centered too. The anger that came with the chakra seemed to undermine his control at every opportunity. But it was down to him again. Shino was down, and Hinata was unconscious, maybe dying if Shino was right. Kiba was out as well, and the rest of Team 7 was struggling. A hard backfist strike clipped his jaw, sending him stumbling backwards. Even as he regained his footing, the bastard was finishing his seals. So fast. And the next instant Naruto was borne aloft on hurricane winds, glancing off of one tree trunk and slamming into another one. Not bothering to use chakra this time, Naruto dug his fingertips into the bark, only slightly surprised when blunt claws found enough purchase to hold him there. He had to be careful this didn't go too far. There was no telling what might happen if he used too much of this. But so far, this wasn't enough. At least, not enough to put down the bastard that hurt Hinata-chan and Shino. Sasuke was fighting it now, dodging more than blocking, but still clearly outclassed. Naruto hit the release on his weights and launched himself forward like an arrow. Sakura was a step or two behind Sasuke, so she saw everything. The grass weirdo knocked Sasuke tumbling backwards, and then palmed a kunai. It drew back to throw, clearly not aiming at Sasuke, but at their unconscious comrades. Sasuke, who was about to charge forward, hesitated for an instant. That fatal indecision gave their enemy time to do a complicated seal with his other hand. Sasuke-kun had said that Haku could do seals one-handed, but this seal was not one Sakura had ever seen before. Even as she was racing forward, her muscles locked in place, and she was frozen, completely helpless. "I think it's time to draw this game to a close," the weird shinobi murmured. And then its neck began to stretch, impossibly long, carrying its head forward. As it approached, Sakura could note, to her dismay, that the skin of its face was coming off as well, revealing another one beneath it. The mouth yawned wide, just like a snake's, as the canines enlarged. It dipped towards Sasuke's neck as it was intercepted by a green blur outlined in crimson. Naruto didn't know what the hell that thing was trying to do, but knocking its head off seemed like a great idea. Unfortunately, he'd slightly underestimated his own speed, so rather than having his fist impact the freak's skull, he just grazed its nose. Still, he had the satisfaction of hearing an audible snap of breaking cartilage, right before something clamped down on his forearm and injected molten steel under his skin. Sakura's eyes weren't good enough to see what happened, even if she could have done something. There was a crack, the head snapped back, blood streaming from its nose, and Naruto collapsed to the ground, screaming until he passed out. She could see Sasuke's hand shake with the effort of trying to move, but he was held just as helpless as her. The grass weirdo, head retracted again, glared down at Naruto, and then he said something that made no sense to her. "Well, that's just as well. All I've done is tick in their petty little bomb. Let the man deal with it if he can." He scowled suddenly, then reached up and grabbed his nose, ignoring the blood streaming down. With an even louder crack that turned Sakura's stomach, the grass shinobi wrenched it back into position. Then he looked back at Sasuke, smirking at the Uchiha's helpless glare. "Now where were we?" Sakura could only stare in horror as that awful head extended toward her Sasuke-kun, dipping down to bite at his neck like some creature from folk tales. As that freakish head withdrew back towards its body, Sakura finally found her voice. "What did you do to them?" she shrieked. Sasuke groaned and slowly collapsed, twitching violently. "I gave Sasuke a little goodbye present," the strange shinobi answered. He didn't even glance toward Naruto. "Sasuke will seek me out someday. He will come to me for power." He smirked at her again as he began to sink down into the wood. "I haven't had this much fun in a long time. I have so much to look forward to now." With that, the grass shinobi passed from sight. Sasuke let out a final agonized cry before he fell unconscious, leaving the canopy in silence. Shino climbed painfully to his feet. His ribs ached with every breath he took, no matter how shallow. "Are you all right?" a voice asked hesitantly. He turned to see Harino Sakura, who had just moved Naruto and Sasuke's bodies over near Kiba and Hinata, who was finally beginning to stir. Shino nodded and then asked, "What happened?" "I couldn't see very clearly." He bit them," she replied with a shudder. "And then they collapsed." She peered at Sasuke's neck and then carefully pushed up Naruto's sleeve. It left some weird design on their skin as well. Shino frowned and carefully made his way over to see. "It appears to be a seal of some sort," he observed. "But I have no idea as to its purpose." It can't be good though, Sakura fretted. That is a valid assumption, Shino agreed. Logically, we should withdraw from the exam. We have 4 disabled allies and only the 2 of us are currently conscious. I myself am injured and not fully effective. Sakura's lips pushed together mulishly as she shook her head. I don't think Sasuke or Kiba would like that, she said after a moment. Shino nodded slightly. For that matter, my teammates are also highly motivated to do well in the exam. While I am unsure as to the status of Naruto and Sasuke, my allies indicate that Hinata and Kiba should be awake soon. Sakura's head came up with an almost audible snap. But you said Hinata was dying. I said she might die, Shino corrected. And if the fight continued on much longer, she may very well have been killed while she was unconscious. But you told Naruto I mean his clone, Sakura asked, frowning. My teammate doesn't always think things through, particularly when he is anxious about a friend, Shino explained while minutely straightening his glasses. I surmised that information would provide sufficient motivation to expedite his release from the summons. What did he do? Sakura finally asked. That red chakra, is it a blood limit or something? You will have to ask Naruto, Shino said firmly. That information is confidential, and not mine to disseminate. Okay, Sakura replied in a clearly dubious tone. So what do we do now? I will recover Naruto's equipment, Shino replied. I believe he has some smelling salts in his backpack. If we can revive Kiba and Hinata, we should be able to move the others to a more defensible locale. At that point we can see if there is a change in Naruto or Sasuke's condition. Sakura nodded. Hinata couldn't ever recall her head hurting this much before. Not even after the worst of her family's special training sessions. One eye refused to open all the way, and the skin around it felt puffy and tight. Her mouth was foul with the taste of blood and her upper lip was caked with it. Her body ached as well, feeling like her bones had been pulled apart, ground up, and then shoved back into her abused flesh. She supposed she should be grateful to even be alive, but she didn't think it was possible to hurt this much and not be dying. All that went right out of her head when she saw who was lying on the tree limb next to her. And Naruto Keikun, she lisped, her swollen lips making her own voice sound alien in her ears. Shino leaned back, discarding the sachet he'd been holding under her nose, as she sat up. She ignored Sakura's curious looks as she quickly laid her hand on her somnolent friend's chest. The steady rise and fall of his respiration reassured her, even as her head reminded her why sitting up quickly was a bad idea. Shino handed her a red pill and a blue pill. I've recovered our packs, he said quietly. Your chakra is low enough that it's advisable to take the soldier pill, and the analgesic is definitely warranted. Farther down the bow, Hinata could see Sakura start ministering to Kiba, who in turn attended to Akamaru. Shino returned to peering into the largest pack. I don't know why Naruto brought the collapsible tents, but it is a good thing that he did so. Naruto and Sasuke showed no signs of waking, so they were carefully bundled up into sections of a tent, hoisted by their teammates. Hinata was a little shaky at first, but she insisted on helping to carry her friend. This, of course, meant that Kiba insisted on carrying Sasuke by himself. After a very cautious descent, they reached the forest floor. Shino dispatched a fair number of flying Kikai bugs, and a few moments later declared the area safe. He led them with a sureness that had Sakura and Kiba a little confused, but he didn't stop to explain until after they were getting settled into a surprisingly spacious cave left by a partially uprooted tree. Some of my allies can comprehend simple images, and transmit back to me rough impressions of what they have seen, he said without preamble as he helped her settle Naruto down onto the soft earth. I propose a temporary alliance, at least until our teammates have recovered. Each team will keep their own scrolls and act together for mutual defense. At the moment, both teams are weakened, and many will see us as easy prey. I suppose we can help you guys out, Kiba drawled, right, Sakura? Sakura winced at Inuzuka's arrogant tone. I should probably point out, Shino replied, straightening his glasses in a manner that Hinata had come to associate with him being irritated, that the only person to actually strike that false genin and still be conscious at this time is Hinata. Hinata swallowed as all 3 of her classmates turned to stare at her. Ayano, I only hit him by surprise, eye in the back, she explained. You are a ninja, correct? Shino asked. Yes, Shino-kun, Hinata answered, dropping her eyes. Then the fact that you were struck by surprise in no way diminishes your accomplishment, correct? Shino continued. Yes, Shino-kun, Hinata answered, her voice more sure this time. That said, the sentiment Naruto ascribed to your taijutsu tutor is an admirable one, Shino concluded. It is only appropriate that we offer assistance to fellow shinobi of the leaf. While I believe it would be more prudent to withdraw from the exam, given the circumstances, I will abide by the desire of the majority to continue. If anything, it will be a fair test of our ability to cope in adverse circumstances. Kiba frowned and grunted. Sakura turned to Hinata with a questioning look. Shino thinks Konoha shinobi should stick together, the Hyuga girl explained. She supposed she was just used to the way her friend spoke. He was usually laconic around strangers. Their first night in the Forest of Death passed quietly, though it was still very tense. After a short meal of ration bars and summoned water, they split the night into shifts in which two stood watch at all times. Hinata's watch was set for the latter part of the night so she'd have time to recover. While Kiba promptly went to sleep, curled up with his dog, Sakura and Shino used the remaining daylight to set up traps in the area surrounding their refuge. For her part, Hinata tried to sleep, but found it difficult. Both Sasuke and Naruto began to tremble slightly as their unnatural slumber became increasingly agitated. Both appeared to be running fevers. Though wet clothes applied to their foreheads did little to help, Hinata and Sakura kept reapplying them, if only to have something to do, the Hyuga realized. Hinata had been through many unpleasant experiences, many of them related to her family. So it was a surprise to realize that the worst feeling she'd ever experienced in her short life was caused by Uzumaki Naruto. It was this feeling of profound helplessness that she couldn't stand. She supposed she'd felt something similar when her mother had died, but that had happened long enough ago that she couldn't clearly remember that awful day. But now she could look at Naruto-kun's face, contorting in pain, and feel like she wanted to die. He was hurting, and she could do nothing to stop it. She tried to remember her father's face the day her mother died, wondering if he had felt like this, but she couldn't recall ever seeing him at all. She remembered the Branch family servants who came to her room with the news, the old woman who held her as she cried, promising she'd tell no one of her lack of composure. It was sad how she can remember that old woman's face more clearly than her mother's. Hinata's breath caught in her throat as she followed her thoughts to their logical conclusion. She didn't just admire her teammate. With the light failing, Shino and Sakura armed the last of the kunai traps and returned to the cave. Their task took longer than expected due to the simply ridiculous number of extra kunai and shuriken Naruto was carrying in his pack. But Shino was determined to make their lair as secure as possible, so they used most of them as ammunition for their traps. Surprisingly, Haruno Sakura seemed to have a gift for designing and setting up traps. Her plans and layouts indicated that she possessed a grasp of tactics and spatial awareness not usually found in kunoichi of her age. This was very much at odds with the persona she'd projected at the Konoha Ninja Academy, where Shino's memories of her were primarily those of a squealing fangirl chasing after Sasuke along with the rest of her peers. Perhaps she had changed, or his initial estimate of her had been as flawed as his opinion of Naruto. In either event, her stock in his estimation rose, even as the sun set. As they returned to the cave, she displayed yet another net improvement. Hinata had finally managed to fall asleep, but had apparently done so while tending to Naruto. She was curled up on the ground next to her teammate, her head pillowed on his left shoulder. His right forearm, with its peculiar wound, was still propped up on his stomach, the sleeve pushed up to the elbow. "Ah," Sakura whispered. She silently made her way to the packs and retrieved an all-weather blanket that she carefully draped over the indigo-haired kunoichi. Looking up at Shino, she silently gestured that they should move back to the entrance. Once there, Shino silently checked with his allies. The immediate vicinity was still clear of any hostile presence. He looked back when Sakura quietly cleared her throat. "She really likes him, doesn't she?" the pink-haired girl asked. "Hinata, I mean." Shino just nodded, remembering Haruno's disparaging attitude toward Naruto that evening at Ichiraku's. "That's so sweet," Sakura whispered with a wistful smile. "He doesn't have a clue, does he?" she asked. "I think he has some inkling, but not explicitly, no," Shino answered in a guarded tone. Sakura sighed. "She seems like such a nice girl, I hope he doesn't hurt her." Uzumaki Naruto is constitutionally incapable of acting with malice aforethought, Shino declared with what he admitted was some heat. Sakura frowned at him, but then shook her head. No, I suppose not. Not intentionally, anyway. That's an unexpected admission, coming from you, Shino replied. Sakura actually blushed a little. I've had a few things pointed out to me. There have been times that Naruto really got on my nerves, but I haven't always been fair towards him either. She sighed. I'm trying to be a better person, she admitted. That is an admirable goal, Shino allowed. So Sakura asked, clearly wishing to change the subject, how far away can your bug sense trouble? Shino inclined his head politely and began his standard lecture on Kikai bugs and their capabilities. By sunrise, Hinata's head had stopped aching quite so badly. Her face was still a mess though, and it even hurt to blush when she woke up with her unbruised cheek resting on Naruto-kun's shoulder. To her disappointment, both he and Sasuke's conditions were unchanged. Shino said nothing when she'd relieved him at midnight, and she'd fortunately risen before Kiba. Sakura, on the other hand, gave her a smile as she headed back into the cave to rest. Despite her misgivings regarding the Kunoichi's previous behavior, Hinata felt Sakura was being sincere. A few moments later, a yawning Kiba joined her at the mouth of the cave. Shino gave her a brief summary of the traps that had been set, and she was able to double-check them using her Byakugan. Though Shino was sleeping now, he'd assured her that his colony had been instructed to wake him if his pickets encountered anything. Just how that wake-up would occur wasn't something she really wanted to think about. In the meantime, she would also periodically use her eyes to scan for intruders that managed to elude everything else. Kiba nodded as she explained their precautions, and then yawned again. You two are pretty useful to have around, he said with grudging respect. He hesitated, and then added, my mom was pretty impressed with your team, and that's not easy to do. I appreciate you all helping us yesterday. Hinata swallowed and struggled to keep a blush away from her battered face. We're all Konoha shinobi, she replied. It's only right that we should help each other. Kiba shrugged as he scratched the back of Akamaru's head. I don't think the older genin teams feel that way. Maybe the rookies from our class. And that other team, is that Hyuga your cousin or something? Hinata nodded, not really wanting to think about meeting Niji out here in direct competition. He seemed to resent both her and Naruto, albeit for different reasons. After a while, they just sat in a semi-comfortable silence, using their enhanced senses to stand watch. It wasn't until late morning that their perimeter was breached. When Naruto gained awareness of himself again, he was lying in what appeared to be a basement. He slowly sat up, wincing as blood began to flow into areas that had been cut off by the hard concrete beneath him. His right arm felt like it was on fire, and he could barely move the shoulder or flex his fingers. There was no sign of Hinata or Shino, nor of Team 7. Had they been captured? Had he? Somehow, he didn't think they were anywhere near. The air felt damp, like this place had been flooded and only recently had the water receded. The lights were muted, and the illumination they cast lent a gray pallor to everything. At first Naruto thought there were circulating fans that ran roughly, but soon he realized that the sound he was hearing was too irregular to be mechanical. Turning around, there was no break in the patterns of hallways that surrounded him, but the sound seemed to be slightly louder in one direction. With nothing better to do, he slowly walked toward the source of the noise. As he shuffled along, he kept trying to flex the fingers of his right hand. They barely moved and the pain grew worse. Looking down at his forearm, he could see a weird black seal that looked like 3 tomo in a spiral. The skin around them was angry and red, and he swore a faint ribbon of vapor appeared to be rising from the center of the design. The further Naruto walked toward the source of the noise, the more uneasy he became. It was a sensation that was both disturbing and oddly familiar. It was a little like being around Gaara again, but not quite. If anything, it was even worse. Finally, the hallway opened into a room with a very high ceiling. Dominating the far wall was a huge metal gate with vertical bars at least 15 meters high. The two halves of the portal were closed, but there was no bar or lock. Instead, a thin strip of paper held the massive gates together. The paper seal was adorned with a single kanji character that was, oddly enough, the symbol for seal. As Naruto peered at the seal, that oppressive feeling spiked again, and an enormous pair of red eyes appeared over a mouth full of huge teeth. The features were shrouded in a haze of red chakra, and Naruto began to put the pieces together. Boy, come closer, a deep voice rumbled, resonating in Naruto's bones. I think I'll just stay right here, Naruto answered in a wary tone. A set of gigantic claws moved out of the darkness, sliding between the bars of the gate. As one, they slammed down onto the concrete, the points scarring the unyielding floor. I'd like to eat you, but this gate won't open, the voice growled. Damnable seal. That only confirmed Naruto's suspicions. Well, I'm not really happy about having you here either, asshole. He glared right into eyes that were bigger than his body as a lifetime's worth of frustration and anger filled his mind with flames. If you just had the decency to freaking die when Yondaime kicked your ass, I wouldn't have been putting up with crap from everyone for as long as I can remember. The huge eyes blinked. Whatever reaction Naruto had been expecting, it wasn't the rusty chuckle that echoed from behind the gate. You didn't mind it when you were using my chakra to save those two weaklings you ran around with. Naruto scowled. Well, if you know that, then you know that one of those weaklings is probably the only reason I didn't slit my wrists afterward. Practically every crappy thing that's happened in my life is because of you, you damned fox. Hinata had been badly hurt getting a solid hit on that freak. He wasn't going to let anyone call her a weakling. He just hoped she was okay, wherever she was. You've got a lot of nerve saying that, the Kyuubi no Kitsune growled, considering that it was your precious Yondaime that ruined both our lives with his little technique. Naruto bit back his first response. That was at least one lecture of Iruka-sensei's that he'd paid close attention to. Despite all that had happened, the story of the fourth had only strengthened his desire to become Hokage someday. And whose village were you destroying at the time? He asked sarcastically. That's a long story, you hairless monkey, the demon growled. But we have more immediate problems. Look at your arm. Naruto glanced down at his paralyzed forearm. The seal was burning now, covered in purple and black flames, and the pain was getting worse. You managed to let my den get marked with another seal, you careless buffoon, the Kyuubi growled. What the hell is it doing? Naruto asked nervously. The fact that the demon actually sounded a little worried was setting off all kinds of warning bells in his mind. It's trying to tap into your chakra coils. It seems to be designed to strengthen the wearer by adding its own chakra to the body's inner coil system. I'm not sure where it's pulling that black chakra from, but it's bad news. How is more chakra bad? Naruto asked cautiously. It's not normal chakra. Portions of it seem to be gravitating toward your pea-sized brain. In addition to whatever it might try to do to your alleged mind, your coils are already under stress from holding your chakra as well the fractions of my chakra that leak out of this cursed seal. There isn't room for a third chakra in here. The huge lips twisted into a feral sneer. You don't want to explode, do you? Naruto shook his head slowly. So what can we do about it? Well, if you hadn't wimped out and gone unconscious, I'd suggest just cutting the arm off at the elbow, the fox suggested. Oh, stop making faces. I bet I could grow it back. Eventually. Anyway, due to your pitiful pain threshold, we have to do this the hard way. The hard way? Naruto asked, feeling a bit ill. If cutting off his arm wasn't the hard way, he wasn't sure he wanted to know what was. I push as much chakra as I can past this seal and hope that seal gives before your inner coils explode, the demon explained. Naruto felt his mouth drop open. That sounds like a really bad idea to me, he protested. I'm not overjoyed either. If you die, I die. But as much as being inside of you is an exercise in torment, the voice continued, being inside of you while you are being controlled by whoever put that seal on you would be worse. How do I know I can trust you? Naruto finally asked. Can you afford not to? The voice asked as the eyes narrowed. If you fall under that seal's influence, who do you think will be in the most danger? Naruto took a deep breath and let it out. The pain in his arm was growing worse by the second. What do I do? He asked. Just stand there and don't resist, the voice replied, the deep reverberations dropping away as the volume lowered. I need you to act as the conduit for this, it continued as a flood of red chakra began to seep out from under the gate, heading toward Naruto's feet. And try not to die, Kyuubi's voice concluded as the chakra reached Naruto, and his world exploded in agony. Hinata heard Shino stirring in the cave behind her even as her eyes picked up a trio of fast-moving shapes through the canopy. Shino had roused Sakura and made it to the mouth of the cave when the first traps went off. Amid the twangs and whooshes there were muted curses, indicating that some of the projectiles had found their mark. Finally, there was a loud yell of frustration followed by a cry of Zankakyaku as a copse of trees near the mouth of the cave was obliterated. "Are you sure this is the right place?" a female voice asked in a plaintive tone. That note might not have been from Sensei. "Yes, I'm sure, Kin," a deeper voice answered. "I can feel the echoes of a cave from my ground waves. That's probably where they are hiding like little rodents." "That's good enough for me, Dosu," another male voice replied. A thin man wearing a tan tunic over a gray camouflage jumpsuit stepped out into the clearing. Hinata didn't need to see the symbol on his forehead to recognize one of the sound genin they'd encountered before the first exam. "Yo," he said in an arrogant drawl, "we're here for the Uchiha." "Well, you can't have him," Sakura snapped, clearly incensed by his cavalier attitude. "We're here to kill him," the bulkier leader in the gray tunic, bandages, and fur mantle said as he joined his subordinate. "A few more bodies doesn't really matter to us, does it?" The skinnier sound nin shook his head, smiling. "Why are we even bothering to talk to these brats?" the long-haired sound kunoichi asked as she joined them. Hinata glanced at Shino, who didn't even open his mouth. She knew from experience that he'd have Kikai bugs seated all around the clearing. It was only a matter of time before they began draining the chakra from the sound nins. Then Dosu stuck out his right arm and rapidly spun in a circle. "We were warned about your tricks, freak," he snarled. "But it's not that hard to figure out the resonance frequency of your bug's shells, is it?" Kiba and Akamaru both let out low cries, Kiba grabbing at his ears as Akamaru whined and put his paws over his ears. Shino winced visibly as well, and Hinata wondered how many of his allies he'd just lost. He'd have to pull the remainder inside his body as well, if he wanted to protect them. Her feet were in motion before she even finished that thought. Her audacity appeared to have caught the sound nins off guard, and she was only a couple of steps from the leader, her hand drawn back for a juken strike, when a solid wall of air sent her flying. Hinata rolled when she struck the ground and flowed back onto her feet to see Zaku moving his open palms to point at her. Hinata had just registered the presence of the metallic air nozzles embedded in his palms when he shouted Zankaha, and a ripple of air began racing towards her. She leapt to the side as the shockwaves demolished a tree where she'd been standing. Glancing back toward the cave, she could see Shino charging out with his kamas unfolded, followed by Sakura as Kiba struggled to his feet. She hadn't heard the ultrasonic waves the sound leader had used to destroy Shino's Kikai bugs, but evidently Inuzuka had a wider hearing range than normal. Only now it was proving to be a liability. Kin began throwing needles at Sakura as Shino stalked toward Dosu. He couldn't use most of his until that one was disabled. Unfortunately, that left her facing an opponent with a strong long-range attack. Hinata might ordinarily have been concerned, since she was facing someone who was not a good matchup for her skills. But she had no doubt what would happen if they made it into the cave while her Naruto-kun lay helpless. Both of the unconscious boys would be dead in moments. That was not something that would happen while she had breath in her body. So she began stalking her opponent, carefully dodging his attacks as she worked her way closer and closer. Zaku's mounting frustration as he continued to miss her seemed to distract him from his growing peril, a realization that brought a slight smile to her cracked lips. Remembering Kurenai-sensei's lectures about maintaining situational awareness, she spared a glance for her teammates, as she rolled away from another hurricane blast. Sakura seemed to be having some trouble with her opponent. She'd been struck in the leg by one of the needles, but her movements suggested that she was at least a little disoriented. Hinata hoped the needles weren't poisoned. Shino, on the other hand, had managed to close with his foe. His weapons flashed in the morning light as they spun in his hands. Dosu was blocking with two kunai and his right forearm, which appeared to be armored, but he was unable to counterattack and his uniform was dotted here and there with blood from minor wounds. Shino-kun seemed quite intent on avenging his fallen allies. Hinata dodged another blast, moving in even closer, when Kiba leaped out of the bushes and slammed into Zaku. The sound nin let out a grunt as they slammed into the ground with Kiba on top. The Inuzuka was moving a kunai toward the sound of Nin's throat, either to take him prisoner or kill him, when the whole point became moot. Hinata didn't even have time to shout a warning as Zaku got one of his upturned palms onto Kiba's stomach and blasted him into the air. She charged forward as a second blast caught Kiba in the air, tearing off a piece of his jacket and sending him tumbling toward Shino and Dosu's battle. Fortunately, Shino heard Kiba's grunt of pain, and stepped back before his swinging blades accidentally eviscerated his ally. Unfortunately, that seemed to be the opening Dosu was waiting for. The Sound Nin quickly swung his right arm around in front of him, and Hinata could almost see the ripples coming off of it and converging on Kiba and Shino. Kiba let out a strangled cry as they converged on his head, making blood shoot out of his ears as his eardrums ruptured. Shino bent forward as the sound waves slammed into his torso with a visceral crunch. He barely retained hold of his weapons as a bright gout of blood exploded from his mouth. Zaku watched this as well, and didn't realize her proximity or his own peril until the last second. As Hinata made her strike, he was just raising one palm to stop her. She launched the index and middle fingers of her right hand, wreathed with a visible glow of chakra, at her foe. At the last instant she diverted her strike, sending the chakra spike lancing into the nozzle that was just being brought to bear. The results were spectacular. The back of Zaku's hand exploded into a spray of aerosol blood, coating his face and blinding him, even as his other hand came up and fired blindly at her. Unfortunately, as close as she was, she couldn't completely avoid his counterstrike, and was launched back toward the cave. Hinata struck the ground hard, knocking the wind out of her. She made it to her hands and knees in time to see Sakura catch Kin in the side of the head with a very solid punch that dropped the sound kunoichi to her knees. But the next instant a kunai thrown by Dosu buried itself in Sakura's upper arm while another ripped through her hair, narrowly missing her skull. But neither that nor the screamed curses of Zaku could distract Hinata from what was happening inside the cave. Landing where she did, she had a clear view of both Sasuke and Naruto. Both were wreathed in dark purple chakra that flickered and waved like some sickly fire. Suddenly Sasuke stood up, a black silhouette amidst the purple flames, but with blotches of glowing red oozing across his skin like flowing embers. The flames around Sasuke died down a little, but glowing red marks on his skin remained, eventually fading to black. Naruto jerked awake and screamed as the purple flames around him spiked even higher. He made it up to his hands and knees. Despite his violent trembling, Hinata could see that the seal on his arm was replaced by a jet of purple-black fire that extended nearly a foot from his skin. With her Byakugan active, she could see that his coil system was now under attack, with red chakra fighting black chakra, and blue chakra caught in the middle. His were opening on their own and vomiting out mixed and contaminated chakra. His coils heaved and began to crack. Naruto was dying. Naruto! Hinata gasped. She didn't think she'd even spoken aloud, but he looked up, directly into her horrified eyes. And he smiled. Hinata-chan, he groaned as he sat back and gripped his forearm with his left hand, right around the seal. He took a deep agonized breath. Then he pulled a kunai from his pouch and slammed it into his forearm, directly into the seal. There was a loud explosion that rocked Hinata backwards. It even made Sasuke step back as his chakra flames wavered under the onslaught. He turned to look back at Naruto as the kunai was ripped from his fingers and the half-melted fragments were embedded in the wall of the cave. The purple-black chakra expanded outward in a shockwave that covered the clearing. It was just blind luck that Sasuke's aura blocked Hinata from the worst of it, because she could see the others shiver and twitch as it passed over them. The tongue of flame extruding from Naruto's forearm abruptly switched from purple to red flames as his aura became completely red. And to Hinata's relief, his chakra coils stopped pulsating like they wanted to rupture and explode. Sasuke nodded and stalked out of the cave, his altered skin making him look more than a little monstrous. His roving eyes stopped moving when he saw Sakura wrenching the kunai from her arm. "Sakura," he said in an eerie voice. "Who the hell did that to you?" Sakura's eyes widened, but she didn't answer. Hinata was a bit distracted herself as Naruto slowly walked out of the cave. He reached out and oh so gently let his fingertips touch a fresh scrape on her cheek. "Who?" he asked in a far too calm voice. He looked over toward Zaku, who was wrapping a bandage around his wounded hand. Sakura seemed to remember that they were still in a fight, because she quickly turned to check on Dosu and Zaku. Sasuke's eyes narrowed as he seemed to recognize the crumpled form of his teammate at Dosu's feet. Both Naruto and Sasuke seemed to disappear as Zaku fired a massive blast with his uninjured hand. Dosu was just starting to swing his right arm around when Sasuke appeared behind him. The number one student of his class reached over, grabbed each side of the Sound Nin's head and gave a sharp twist. When he let go, Dosu dropped to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut, blood pouring from the corpse's nose and mouth. Zaku was pivoting for another blast when Naruto appeared beside him, grabbed his wrist in a chakra-wreathed fist, and crushed it utterly. Sasuke glanced over at Naruto, and then began to stalk toward the remaining sound ninja, his face impassive and his tread as implacable as an executioner's. Sakura seemed to realize what he planned because she lurched forward at the last second and wrapped her arms around Sasuke, pleading with him to stop. "Sasuke," she finally whispered, "what's wrong with you?" "I feel pretty strong right now. He gave that to me. Now I can truly be an avenger." Sasuke glanced down at a smear of blood on Sakura's leg. "Now it's her turn." "You are not the Sasuke I know," Sakura said in a tearful voice. Just stop this. Please, Sasuke?" Kin had finally recovered at this point, and looked like she'd rather be semi-conscious again. She was visibly cowering until Sasuke finally grunted. "All right, Sakura," he quietly acquiesced. But when he looked back at Kin, his voice was hard again. "Get your teammates and go. Now." The black marks slowly began to fade from his skin. Naruto turned to glare at the now disarmed Zaku. "You'd better help her," he added with a glare. It was only after they left that anyone noticed that, accidentally or intentionally, they'd left behind their scroll. Naruto scowled as both teams gathered themselves after the battle. Everyone looked like they'd been beaten with a stick. A large, dirty stick. The dark marks on Sasuke's skin had faded away, but the boy still seemed a little off to Naruto. Kiba groaned and rolled onto his side before vomiting. Naruto wrinkled his nose at the smell. Akamaru whined piteously as he circled his partner. Shino was only just beginning to sit up, and Sakura was clinging to the Uchiha like a terrified barnacle. "Crap," Naruto muttered and went back to the cave, looking for his backpack. He pulled out his partially depleted first aid kit, wondering where all his spare kunai had gone. When he emerged from the cave, Shino was shakily climbing to his feet with Hinata's assistance. They tended the worst of their wounds when Kiba, his equilibrium finally restored, looked around and frowned at the scroll the sound team had left behind. "That looks like an Earth scroll," he said as he slowly climbed to his feet and spat. "We got a Heaven scroll, so we could use this," he said carefully. "What about you guys?" "Looks like you got lucky then," Naruto replied glibly. "Good thing, too, because I don't think your team could handle the Konohamaru Corps right now." Kiba whirled around, instantly furious. Naruto noticed that nothing set off the Inuzuka faster than an insult to his pack. "You want me to handle your loser but Uzumaki?" the larger boy snarled. "You'd have to catch me." Naruto shot back with a cheeky grin and dived into the underbrush. Hinata was more than a little perturbed with her teammate. Sure, it was nice that he was bouncing back so quickly from his ordeal, but this wasn't really the place or time for him to revert to his academy behavior. She wondered for a moment if he'd been struck on the head during either of the last two battles. Shino-kun let out a quiet sigh as Kiba chased Naruto out of the clearing. She was tempted to activate her eyes to track them, but her head ached abominably, so she refrained since they were still within earshot. Not that it was hard to do, they were making a lot of noise out there. Evidently a full-blown wrestling match had ensued. "Can't you control him?" Shino and Sakura both said it simultaneously. Both of them looked sharply at each other, and Sasuke muttered something that sounded like idiots under his breath. After a couple of minutes, a somewhat rumpled-looking Naruto was hurled back into the clearing. He shot to his feet as Kiba stalked toward him. The Inuzuka, however, was intercepted by a pink-haired kunoichi that had evidently had enough of his foolishness. She let him know this verbally and by grabbing his ear and yanking it hard enough to turn him around. Akamaru whined in sympathy as he trotted along behind his humbled partner. Naruto stuck his tongue out at Kiba, but refrained from further childishness when Hinata grasped his forearm. Shino didn't say or do anything, but his irritation was a palpable weight in the air. However, Aburaim didn't make a habit of voicing his displeasure in front of others. It wasn't until Team 7 had said their goodbyes and left for the tower that he spoke. "Your pupils are not dilated, and I do not recall our opponent utilizing any psychotropic chemical attacks, so I would appreciate an explanation of your behavior," Shino said, his frustration showing in how he bit off the words. "What do you mean?" Naruto asked. "The scrolls?" "Yes. The scrolls," Shino replied. "I presume there is some reason you wanted Team 7 to think we had an Earth scroll?" "Yeah," Naruto replied. "If I didn't, They might not have taken the scroll those sound jerks left. Sasuke is pretty proud. He wouldn't want to think we are doing them any favors. Shino let out another microscopic sigh. If Hinata's hearing were any less acute, she wouldn't have caught it at all. What I do not comprehend is why you are so adamant that they get the scroll, seeing as how we had equal need for it. I understand that Mato guy wished that we would support comrades in need, but I think this goes beyond what he intended. Naruto frowned for a moment, and Hinata realized that he hadn't even considered Gai-sensei's words in that context. That isn't it at all, he said as he lowered his voice and glanced around. He gave Hinata a very direct look. Despite her aching head, Hinata activated her blood limit and did a very quick scan of the area. No one was within her range, so she cautiously shook her head. Okay, I wanted them to get the scrolls so they could get Sasuke to a medic nean fast, Naruto whispered. He seemed alright when they left, Shino observed. Naruto shook his head. I don't think so. I broke the seal that freak put on me, but Sasuke he did something else. It's still on him, and whatever it does it's nasty enough to scare my prisoner into helping me get rid of it. Your prisoner? Hinata asked in a shaky voice. Naruto nodded. While I was out, it paid me a visit, like inside my mind. I could see it, trapped behind the seal, and it was as big a jerk as I imagined it would be. But it could feel that thing on my arm and it said it would start to influence me the longer it was on me. It didn't want to be imprisoned any worse than it already was, so it helped me push the chakra to tear it off. Naruto paused. I supposed it was considered putting up with just me to be less of a pain. Anyway, the sooner they get him to the medics and the Hokage, the better. When Kiba followed me into the bushes, I grabbed him and used some clones to make noise. I told him to get his team to the tower and tell that Kakashi guy about the seal immediately. Why didn't you just tell them directly? Hinata asked, puzzled. Naruto shrugged. Sasuke wouldn't believe dead last if I told him the sky was blue. Sakura will always back him up too. And I don't really want to talk too much about how I found out about the seal. Shino nodded. That was impressive. Naruto blinked. I agree with both your reasoning and your methodology. We are under less of a time constraint than our allies, whether they know it or not, and will have other opportunities to acquire an Earth Scroll. Hinata couldn't help but smile at the pleased blush that colored Naruto-kun's cheeks as they resumed their journey. After that freaky grass weirdo, and the hidden sound assassination squad, running into a group of hidden Miss Genin with all of Team 8 awake and functional was a bit of a relief. Hinata tapped her pant leg with 2 fingers, signaling that she'd sensed a low-powered genjutsu trying to affect them. Naruto counted 10 steps before bringing his hands together and concentrating his chakra. Naruto Majutsu, Chakra Pulse, he murmured as he released a highly restrained surge. This one only covered the immediate vicinity, rather than half of Konoha. No sense scaring the visitors. The air seemed to waver, and a trio in light gray bodysuits and dark blue cloaks shimmered into view. Naruto had to squint to identify the village symbols on their hatite, and realized that the air was growing hazy. Naruto was fairly sure the haze was caused by moisture gathering in the air, but he wasn't prepared to take any chances. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. He snarled as he formed the ram's seal. There was an explosion of smoke and a dozen clones materialized between Team 8 and the Mizugenin team. Manabu. The slightly taller one in the middle snapped. The one on the right, who wore dark glasses, brought his hands together for seals and 4 clones of him appeared in front of Naruto's clones and attacked. The clone war was short and one-sided. However, when the enemy clones were hit, they dissipated into masses of frothy water with an unhealthy green tinge to it. When the liquid fell to the ground, it splashed everything in the immediate vicinity and proceeded to eat smoking holes in it. Taking out the 4 clones cost Naruto 6 of his, dispelled by the acidic spray. While this was happening, the mist ninja on the left drew Naruto's attention. The skinny boy's arms were moving under his cloak, but instead of forming seals, Naruto saw that his hands were digging into large containers strapped to each leg. His hands whipped forward, hurling 4 small green spheres at Naruto. Naruto's shuriken was in the air before he even thought about it, and intercepted 3 of the spheres, causing them to burst open and spray more of the green gunk on his remaining clones. He didn't need the memories after they exploded to know that it was more of that caustic liquid. He ducked under the last sphere and it struck the ground in front of Shino and Hinata, spraying them with its acidic contents. Naruto smirked as the two Hang clones behind him exploded. 3 Hinatas charged out of the undergrowth at the grenade thrower. He spun, throwing more of his acid spheres. The 2 leftmost Hinatas kept running, and the spheres sailed harmlessly through the insubstantial Bunshin. The real Hinata dived forward into a rolling somersault that Naruto, quite indignantly, remembered using on her when they sparred. She shot to her feet practically within the stunned Mizushinomi's cloak and folded him up with a juken strike to the abdomen that left him spasming on the ground. The leader spun toward Hinata, a long staff that looked like it was made out of water forming in his hands. She sidestepped his first swing and the grass burned where the shimmering end of the staff touched it. The dark glasses guy made some more acid clones, but he only managed 2 this time, and the effort left him bent over and weaving. He let out a scream as a dark mass of insects fell out of the canopy and enveloped his head. Naruto was already charging forward, but couldn't suppress a sympathetic shudder. He was really glad Shino never did that to him when they sparred. The guy staggered, clawing at his face as the acid clones lost cohesion and splashed to the ground. Shino put him out of his misery by the simple expedient of dropping out of the trees on top of him, driving his knees into his back, and slamming him into the forest loam. The distinctive sound of ribs breaking distracted the leader from his attempts to maim the dodging Hyuga. Naruto's thrown kunai lodging in his shoulder was even more distracting, making him drop the acid staff. Naruto's fist hammering into the side of his head just made him unconscious. Naruto couldn't help smiling to himself as they tied up the unconscious shinobi. It was about damn time all that planning and training worked right. Of course, it probably helped that they were facing real genin for once. If that freaky grass dude is really a genin, he'd give up ramen. For life. Even better, the only damage they'd taken was a couple of discolored spots on the sleeve of his jacket. Using the clones to soak up the initial attacks so they could figure them out worked like a charm, as did using the smoke as cover so Hinata and Shino could slip away and set up surprise attacks. When Shino found an earth scroll in the leader's belt pouch, Naruto wanted to cheer, but he knew Shino would frown on making too much noise. He settled for lifting Hinata-chan up by the shoulders and spinning around twice as he did the official Konoha Maru Core victory dance. He belatedly remembered she was still a little hurt when he saw how red her face grew around those awful bruises. "Ah, sorry Hinata-chan," he hissed as he carefully set her back down. "I forgot," he explained as he looked down, shamefaced. "Ayano, it's all right Naruto-kun," she said, though she sounded like she was having trouble catching her breath. Had she injured her ribs more than they knew? "I'm glad we have our second scroll too." As they approached the tower to turn in their scrolls, Shino quietly brought up the possibility of other teams staking out the grounds near the tower to ambush weary competitors with both scrolls. Naruto thought about this for a minute as they rested on a high tree branch. As stealthy as we try to be, there's only so many ways to get to the tower, right? Shino nodded. Given the time constraints and limited approach vectors, the situation is not an optimal one for covert movement. Hinata looked a little distressed, but didn't say anything. Then a thought struck Naruto. "We're going about this all wrong," he declared as he brought his hands together. "Tajua Kage Bunshin no Jutsu," he said aloud as he pushed almost all the chakra he had into the technique. Objectively, he knew that he'd improved a lot since that night with Iruka and Mizuki, but he was still surprised at the throng of clones that covered every available bit of flat space he could see. Shino's eyebrows were clearly visible above his glasses, but the way the left one was twitching indicated that he was less than pleased with Naruto's one tool for all jobs attitude toward his favorite technique. "All right," Naruto shouted in a loud voice that had Hinata making frantic shushing gestures toward him. "You know what to do. Split into groups of 3 and henge." There was a staccato roar of pops. When the smoke cleared, a third of the clones looked like Shino and a third looked like a blushing Hinata. "Now, staying with your groups, spread out and charge the tower. The last ones there have to buy the ramen," Naruto announced. He turned to Hinata and Shino as the clones took off, which took a while. There were so many that they got in each other's way at first. "It's not like a recon mission," he said in a more normal tone of voice. "We don't have to conceal that we were here, we just have to make it impossible for anyone to pick us out before we reach the finish line." Naruto looked at them expectantly. Shino's eyebrow had stopped twitching, but now they both stood stock still. Let's get moving, he urged them. I don't have the money to buy that much ramen. By the time they reached the tower, Naruto was nursing one hell of a headache. Between the other teams, the traps that had been set, and the normal forest hazards, less than a third of the clones made it through. The problem was random bits of memory that Naruto was constantly bombarded with as his clones were dispelled in an amazing variety of ways. His wince was particularly painful when he received the memories of the idiot that expired trying to give Sabaku no Gaara a noogie. He had no idea you could do that with sand, and it looked really painful. At least it was a clone of him, and not Shino or Hinata that did it. He didn't want that weird kid focusing on anyone else if he could help it. On the other hand, he chuckled when he learned of the one that died mooning Niji. But the way he'd gone after the Hinata clone as well was a little disturbing. Maybe he could tell it really wasn't his cousin and resented the deception. Genius or not, he had no sense of humor whatsoever. But in the end, what mattered was that his less than subtle ruse had worked. They made it into the tower without another scratch, and he was pleasantly surprised when they used their scrolls as the sign suggested and Irika-sensei appeared in a cloud of smoke. Hello? He greeted them. I knew you'd. His face fell as he looked at them, his eyes lingering on Hinata's bruised face. What happened to you out there? Are you all right? Shino twisted a little, finally allowing his discomfort to show as he pressed on his ribs. We ran into some unusually skilled opposition. A visit with a medical professional after our debriefing may be prudent. Since they'd reached the tower with almost a full day to go before the second exam ended, there was plenty of time for them to make their reports. Given all the high-level visitors attending the Chunin exam, they ended up just talking to Kurenai-sensei in a rather dusty meeting room in the basement of the tower. Naruto was looking at Kurenai when Shino described the encounter with the grass freak, so he was treated to the sight of his Jounin instructor going completely white. Are you absolutely sure that the snake chasing Kiba was a summons? She asked, interrupting Shino's monologue. Shino adjusted his glasses. It gave every appearance of being one, he answered. Upon receiving a mortal injury, it dissipated in a manner not unlike one of Naruto's shadow clones. She nodded slowly. Unfortunately, I agree. Please continue. Shino continued without interruption, though the subtle cues Naruto was picking up from his sensei suggested it was a near thing. Shino himself paused right after describing Hinata punching the freak in the back. Kurenai spun toward the girl in obvious surprise, and her proud smile had the Hyuga girl blushing and looking down at her clasped hands. When he was finished, Kurenai nodded and was silent for a moment, apparently thinking, before she spoke. You three have done amazingly well, far better than I hoped. However, I want you to be very cautious from now on. There is something going on here that I do not understand. That man you fought was, as best I can tell, an S-class missing nin named Orochimaru. He was the genius student of the Hokage before he betrayed Konoha and should be considered extremely dangerous. Do not seek him out, but if you do see any sign of him, inform A or ANBU at once. Sensei, did Team 7 make it okay? Naruto asked in a sick voice. Had that nutcase ambushed them again after they separated? Yes, they did, Kurenai assured him. Now I understand why Kakashi left almost immediately with Sasuke. Are you sure the seal he put on you is completely gone, Naruto? Naruto nodded and pushed up the sleeve of his jacket to show her the scar. Eret said it was bad enough being trapped inside me without that messing around with my mind. Kurenai frowned. I don't even begin to understand how you can talk to that thing. I'm going to ask the Hokage if he can give me any more information on the seal, or a means to contact someone who can tell us more. I want you to be equally cautious when dealing with your prisoner. Don't take anything it says at face value. Naruto nodded soberly. There was little chance of him ever doing that, but he could hear the concern in his sensei's voice. So, for once, Uzumaki Naruto decided to keep his mouth shut. Sitting in an office elsewhere in the tower updating the list of remaining participants, Yumino Irika suddenly stiffened as all the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He didn't know what was causing it, but he instinctively knew that a massive violation of the natural order was occurring. He suspiciously peered around, even looking under his desk, but he couldn't find anything to explain that uneasy feeling. Controlling his shudders of dread, the Chunin sat back down and double-checked the list again. Naruto also didn't resist at all when Kurenai sent them to the infirmary to be checked out by the medic needs. He wasn't so concerned for himself though. Shino was still slightly stooped over, favoring his ribs. The deviance wasn't great, but it was apparent to anyone familiar with his normal ruler-straight posture. Hinata-chan was visibly worse off, and he had to struggle not to flinch every time he saw the massive bruises on her face from the battle with Orochimaru. He'd follow Sensei's orders to avoid him in general, but if he had a chance to smack him one to cover their retreat, he'd definitely take it. The medics mostly ignored him at first, which was fine by him. But Shino and Hinata were insistent, actually downright scary, about them attending to him as well. The senior medic, with a frown of distaste, performed the seals for what appeared to be a diagnostic of some sort. His extended palm passed over Naruto's head and torso without comment, but paused over his forearm. Naruto didn't think his other injuries would even be detectable. The speed with which he healed was pretty unreal. With a sigh, he slid up his sleeve again. "What happened there?" the medic asked curiously, leaning forward and peering at the scar. "Curse seal," Naruto said with a shrug. "I had to blow it up." The medic straightened up so fast he almost fell over backwards. "I see," he stammered. "I think you are fine to go now. All of you." Naruto glanced over at his teammates. Shino was taking deeper breaths now, relief evident in his posture, and Hinata was bowing to a younger woman, and when she turned toward him her face was unmarked. "Thank you very much," he said politely, bowing to the surprised senior medic Nin. With hours to go before the second exam officially ended, there was more than enough time to get cleaned up and take a short nap in the examinees' dormitory before Kurenai-sensei collected them. The joining led them to a large enclosed auditorium, where they joined the ranks of the teams that completed the second exam. Naruto was a little ashamed to admit he was surprised to see Team 10 among the victors, though he supposed Shikamaru would have found it more troublesome to put up with Ino's complaints if they failed. The latter was glaring at Sakura since Team 7 was lined up next to them and the pink-haired Kunoichi was between her and Sasuke. Sasuke looked a little pale, but just as surly as ever, so that Kakashi guy must have fixed his seal. Naruto wasn't surprised to see Team Guy there as well, but the only other Konoha team to pass the second exam was Kabuto's trio of older genin. Unfortunately, the Sand team was there as well. Naruto knew there wasn't much chance of that Gaara character not making it through, but he'd held out some faint hope that one of his teammates might have to drop out and thereby disqualify all three. He suppressed a smirk when he felt the killing intent radiating from both Gaara and Neji. It was nice to know his skills at annoying people hadn't grown rusty since his academy days. Still, that left only 18 participants in the exam, 15 of them from Konoha, which Naruto thought was pretty damn good. He couldn't help but smile a little as the Hokage addressed them from a raised platform, flanked by the team's sensei. That smile disappeared soon enough though. After the Hokage congratulated them on passing the second round, he explained the reasons why they do a joint test and introduced the third examiner, a guy with a nasty cough named Gekahate. In between throat clearings, the sickly-looking guy told them there were more people left than could be run through the third examination. There would have to be a preliminary elimination round. Most of the people around Naruto made comments about that, and few of them were favorable. Both the preliminary round and the actual third exam would be one-on-one battles between the examinees. However, the teams were effectively dissolved until the end of the examination, so losing would not disqualify your teammates. Naruto cautiously looked around at his fellow genin and frowned. His eyes were met with hard glares from more than a few. According to the examiner, only those who won the preliminary round and fought publicly in the finals would have a chance of being granted Chunin status. Before they began, Hate asked if anyone felt like they could no longer continue. To Naruto's surprise, Kabuto raised his hand, saying he was too injured to fight. Naruto didn't think he looked that beat up, but the examiner just nodded and the silver-haired genin exited through the door they entered by. "All right, with 17 of you, there will be 8 matches," Hate announced. "After 8 matches, whoever the odd person is will have a bye and proceed directly to the finals. These matches are randomly selected, so you will all have an equal chance." With that, the rest of them were directed to stairs that led up to a balcony that overlooked the arena floor. Most of their sensei joined them up there, and the genin assembled in little team-sized clumps. "I can't believe all the rookies made it, and almost no one else did," Naruto muttered. "That does seem to stretch the bounds of probability," Shino agreed. "I hope that no one takes it as a sign of collusion." "Why the hell would we want to cheat?" Naruto demanded, his voice rising slightly. "If we aren't qualified to take Chunin-level missions, what's the point of making us Chunin? Remember what the Hokage said, the exams often serve political purposes, Kurenai interjected, and showcased the strengths of each village. If a village's shinobi look stronger to outsiders, they are more likely to be hired for missions. However, the Hokage doesn't countenance such tactics. Wars between hidden villages have started over time. The glare that accompanied her words spoke even louder, and Naruto subsided. The electronic bulletin board flashed, and announced the first randomly selected match, Ataki Yoroi vs. Akimichi Chuji. Kabuto's teammate was a large, muscular man with small dark glasses and a cloth covering the rest of his face. Unlike the friendly silver-haired genin, Yoroi was a fairly nasty-looking customer. The chubby boy didn't even come up to his opponent's shoulder. No sooner did hate call for them to begin than he swiped at Chuji with a glowing hand. Chuji jumped back with a barely muffled screech, but the heel of the larger man's hand still brushed his shoulder. Chuji visibly wilted and stumbled backward on unsteady legs. "You have no defense against my technique," Yoroi sneered as he stalked toward Chuji. The boy backed away, looking like he wanted to run for it. Yoroi herded Chuji into a corner and took another swipe at him. Chuji dived to the side, barely avoiding the attack. He frantically scrambled to his feet, his eyes glued to his opponent. "Would you stop delaying the inevitable?" Yoroi growled. "Or are you a coward as well as fat?" The sudden silence was deafening. The only thing that marred it was the single word muttered by Shikamaru. "Shit." Chuji's face went red. "Did you call me fat?" Yoroi paused in his advance. Privately, Naruto didn't blame him. There was suddenly an overabundance of killing intent in the room, and it hadn't been there 10 seconds ago. "Yeah, I did," Yoroi snapped in a belligerent tone. "Do you think you can stop me?" he asked, making a come-hither gesture with his glowing hand. "I'll pull all the chakra out of your body faster than you can empty a bento box, fat ass." Naruto cringed. Chuji's eyes seemed to fill with flames. "I'm going to crush you like a grape," he screamed as he jumped backward. "Ninpa Baika no Jutsu." Naruto's mouth dropped open as Chuji's torso expanded to several times the normal size, becoming almost perfectly spherical. With a jerk, his arms, legs, and head retracted, only to be replaced by jets of blue chakra flames. Chuji began to spin in place, suspended by the jets of fire, until he touched down and began rolling forward with increasing speed. The dumbfounded Yoroi stared at the Akimichi meatball tank bearing down on him. At the last second he jumped back to avoid it, but the spinning Chuji kept accelerating. Yoroi dodged aside at the last moment, but Chuji still managed to clip him, sending the older genin flying. Naruto decided the spin must have made that hit even harder than it appeared, because Yoroi landed heavily on his side and lurched to his feet, favoring his right leg. Chuji didn't corner very sharply in his meatball tank form, so Yoroi had time to regain his bearings. By the time Chuji got turned around to make another pass, Yoroi had his chakra-draining technique ready. Again, he sidestepped at the last second, trailing his palm across Chuji's axis of rotation. The meatball tank wobbled as its rotation veered out of true, but Chuji got it back under control again and came around for another pass. However, the chakra drain seemed to have had an effect, because he wasn't spinning nearly as fast as before. Yoroi tried to do the same trick again, but this time Chuji managed to veer into him as he dodged aside. Yoroi let out a startled scream as Chuji ground him down into the cement floor. He slammed his palm directly against Chuji's mass, and the snap of his fingers being bent backward and broken was sickening. Yoroi was completely out of sight when Chuji's collapsed, leaving him tumbling forward to land in a moaning heap. When the dust cleared, the older genin's broken body was visible amidst the shards of concrete. After looking at Chuji, who was slowly sitting up, holding his head, Hate quickly declared him the winner of the first match and called for some medic needs. Chuji stared at his opponent, eyes widening in horror, until his sensei appeared next to him and led him back up to the balcony, speaking softly the entire way. After Yoroi had been carried off, the second match was announced. Tenten from Team Guy was pitted against the girl from Gaara's team, Temari. As soon as it was announced, Guy and Lee began cheering for her at the top of their lungs. Naruto and his team slowly edged away from the spandex-clad duo to preserve their hearing. Naruto ended up near Shikamaru as Tenten began her first attack, which amazingly enough missed. "This is going to be troublesome," Shikamaru murmured. "Why do you say that?" Naruto asked in a low voice. It's already over, Shikamaru said and turned toward Chuji, who had just finished talking to his sensei, Asuma. The boy looked a little more settled, but he was still a little green around the edges. If Shikamaru says it's over, Chuji confirmed with a nod. Naruto frowned and turned back to the fight. Tenten did some weird trick with the scroll that allowed her to throw a dozen weapons at a time, but Temari just blocked them all by swinging her fan. Despite its lack of success, Naruto was really glad she hadn't used that technique on him and Lee during her target practice sessions. Naruto glanced over at Shikamaru, but his expression didn't change. He turned toward Shino, who appeared to be frowning. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to be picking up on, but two of the smarter people he knew didn't like this match, so he started to worry about Tenten. Tenten raised the stakes with her next attack, using two scrolls at once to throw a simply ridiculous number of sharp objects at the sand kunoichi. Unfortunately, it was no more effective. Temari just swung her fan and blew them all off course. Then Tenten did something with chakra to lift the weapons up again and send them raining down on her foe, only this time she was caught in the blast of wind from Temari's fan and sent flying. Naruto scowled. Tenten specialized in ranged attacks, but it was almost impossible for her to hit Temari because of her fan. This was almost the worst possible matchup for her. Was that what Shikamaru and Shino were annoyed about? The fight ended when Temari finally attacked with her fan, creating a massive whirlwind that pulled Tenten into the air and knocked her unconscious with chakra-laced wind. As Naruto watched Hate declare Temari the winner, he realized something about the nature of the test. Random or not, these one-on-one fights could easily pit someone against an opponent that they didn't have the techniques or the tactics to fight. When they fought as a team, each member instinctively sought out opponents they could do well against. For example, someone trying to use taijutsu to defend against a Hyuga like Hinata was asking for a quick trip to the hospital. Likewise, someone without area effect attacks wouldn't fare well against Shino's bugs. But shinobi didn't always fight in teams, and they didn't always have the luxury of picking their opponent. Forcing them to fight someone with skills that trumped their normal tactics made them learn to adapt on the fly, or learn to lose gracefully. Of course, in the field, on a real mission, you'd replace losing with dying. Such sobering thoughts made him all the more uneasy when the next match was announced: Aburame Shino vs. Inuzuka Kiba. Naruto shook his head. He didn't need to worry so much about his teammate. Even if he won, Kiba wouldn't do anything that would permanently injure a former classmate. Loud and boastful he might be, but he wasn't cruel or vicious. He grinned and patted his silent friend on the shoulder as he walked by. He knew from sparring with him that Shino didn't particularly like to lose. When the boys faced each other in front of Hate, Kiba nodded and smirked. "Don't think I'm going to go easy on you, because of what happened in the forest," he said, sticking his jaw out belligerently. "Don't hold back on my account," Shino replied coolly as he adjusted his glasses. As soon as Hate signaled for them to begin, Kiba crouched down and brought his hands together to form seals. "Gijyu Ninpu, Shikyaku no Jutsu," he growled as he dropped onto all fours. Naruto's eyes widened as Kiba's body was enveloped in a light haze of chakra and his fingernails grew into sharp claws. Shino dropped into a combat stance with more weight balanced on his back leg. The shafts of his kama shot out of his sleeves and into his waiting hands, but he did not immediately deploy the blades. "Let's go!" Kiba shouted and charged forward in a blur of motion. Shino's feet didn't move, but his torso twisted as his left arm shot forward. There was a loud clang and Kiba reeled backward, his forehead protector twisted halfway around his head. "I thought you were faster than that," Shino observed in the same tone of voice he might use to discuss the weather. He spun the kama once in his hand before returning it to a guard position. With the blade still concealed inside, it looked more like a baton. A thick baton with a metal cap on each end. Kiba snarled something that Naruto was just as glad they couldn't hear from up on the balcony. There were certain words and phrases that Kurenai-sensei had informed him were not appropriate for mixed company. Kiba pulled something out of his equipment pouch and threw it at Shino's feet. Naruto's teammate was enveloped in thick clouds of black smoke. Kiba dived into the smoke cloud while Akamaru circled it warily. There were several dull thuds before Kiba stumbled backward out of the cloud, his hand pressed against his jaw. When the smoke dissipated, Shino was still standing in the same spot, in the same stance. He didn't say a word, and that just seemed to further enrage his opponent. Naruto frowned when Kiba pulled a pill out of his pouch and flipped it to Akamaru. The puppy gulped it down, and then growled fiercely as its fur changed from white to reddish brown. Kiba gulped down a pill as well, and then crouched down. Akamaru sprang onto his master's back as Kiba growled Gijia Ninpu, Jujin Bunshin. There was a burst of smoke, and when it cleared, Naruto now saw two feral-looking Kibas glaring at Shino. It was impossible to tell which one was Kiba and which one was really Akamaru. You know, Naruto makes a lot more than 2 clones when we free spar, Shino observed in a neutral voice. That just seemed to enrage them further, and they sprang at Shino, extending the short claws that had replaced their fingernails. This time, Shino did move, pivoting smoothly to the side and out of reach of one of the Kibas. The other reached out to claw at the Aburame, but Shino brought his kama around with surprising speed and smacked him on the elbow with a loud crack. The struck Kiba yelped and somersaulted forward. One of his trailing legs hooked toward Shino's head, forcing Aburame to duck. The other one pivoted and leapt toward Shino. Shino spun away from the charge, but left a piece of his jacket sleeve behind. Naruto was impressed by how well the beast clone coordinated with the original as they took turns springing at Shino. His teammates always managed to avoid or redirect their attacks, but it was often a close thing. Finally, when Shino was forced to jump backwards from a coordinated strike, one of the Kibas yelled Gutsuga. And they both began to spin so fast that they were little more than spiraling gray blurs as they barreled into Shino, hurling him into the air as more rips appeared in his jacket. Both Kibas landed in a crouch, balanced on their fingertips and the balls of their feet. Shino twisted as he fell and barely managed to land on his feet. But he still had a firm grip on his weapons. There was a loud click as the blades folded out of the shafts and locked into place. Naruto didn't have to be able to see through the dark glasses to know his friend was getting serious. Both Kibas launched themselves into the air with another cry of Gutsuga, as their double fang technique sent them hurling down at the ground where Shino stood. Naruto was dimly aware of his fingers digging into the railing. There was a cloud of dust as both spirals slammed into the ground, totally obscuring the combatants. Naruto winced as one of Shino's kamas came flying out of the dust cloud, apparently torn from his grasp. It flipped end over end through the air until it clattered to the ground near the balcony. Naruto's eyes picked up the wet red stain running along the edge of the blade. Kiba stumbled out of the cloud as the dust settled, coughing hard. Shino picked himself up off the floor of the arena, cradling one wrist against his chest, while still holding his remaining kama at the ready. Beyond him, Naruto could see another Kiba, sprawled on the ground with a jagged cut arcing up one sleeve of his jacket, which was now leaking blood fairly rapidly. The wounded Kiba let out a whimper and with a pop turned back into an Akamaru with a bloody foreleg. The Nin dog edged away from Shino, carefully holding the wounded limb so it didn't touch the ground. "You bastard!" Kiba growled. "You hurt Akamaru!" He stalked toward the wounded Aburame, his face constricted with fury. But after the third step, he stumbled, and then fell to one knee. With a surprised expression, he toppled forward onto his face. Hate stared at Kiba, then looked over at Shino. "His chakra has been exhausted," Shino explained. A line of Kikai bugs exited Kiba's jacket and made their way toward their host. Another mass crawled out of Akamaru's fur as the small dog's rear legs folded up and it sat down. It slowly curled up on the floor, barely lifting its head enough to lick at the wound on its leg. Hate swallowed and then coughed. "Winner, Aburame Shino." Medic Neens with a stretcher came out and rolled Kiba onto it. Another approached Shino, but the boy pointed toward the prostrate dog. With some reluctance, the medic picked up the dozing Akamaru, and Shino followed him out the arena exit. Naruto stared after his teammate as he made his way out of the arena, pausing only as the next match was announced. Naruto was wondering whether Shino was really alright and actually missed the announcement. He looked up as the door closed behind his friend and saw the names, Naruto Shikamaru vs Tsurugi Misumi. Of course, the disgusted sigh coming from his classmate should have clued Naruto in that Shikamaru had been called. The Nara genin looked far less enthusiastic about the match than Chuji, let alone Ino. He didn't even start moving until his Jounin sensei, Asuma, put his hand on the annoyed-looking genin's shoulder. The last of Kabuto's purple-clad teammates had clear glasses to go with his weird veil. However, his uniform tunic left his arms bare, covered only by a plain white short-sleeved shirt. That and the long gloves on his hands suggested he might be some variety of close-range fighter. The older genin seemed a bit more eager to fight, and sneered at Shikamaru as he approached. "Don't think I'll take it easy on you because you're just a spoiled brat." Shikamaru plodded up to his place in front of Hate, and then finally raised his eyes to look at his opponent. "I didn't think anyone could be as annoying as Ino," he drawled. "Hey!" Ino shouted, shaking her fist. But no one really paid much attention. Their arguments at the academy were as predictable as the behavior of Sasuke's fan club. "Once I get hold of you," the older genin warned, "this fight will be over. You should show more respect for your seniors." Yeah, Shikamaru sighed, rolling his eyes. "Now you sound like my dad." Hate evidently decided to start the match before it started without him. "Begin!" he commanded. Misumi instantly charged forward and launched a taijutsu combination that flowed into a grappling move. Naruto blinked and rubbed his eyes. Flowed was really the right word. The older genin's arms, and then his legs twisted around Shikamaru in a bizarre fashion, like they were made of rubber. In an instant, he'd wrapped Shikamaru up, binding his legs in place and pinning his arms against his torso. "I can unhinge my joints and use chakra to control my body. I can strangle you or simply break your bones until you give up." Naruto swallowed. That was a really creepy fighting style. Unless maybe you were fighting a girl, he swallowed again and blushed. No, it was still really creepy. How could such a weirdo like him and his chakra-sucking partner grow up in Konoha? At least Kabuto seemed somewhat normal. "That's interesting," Shikamaru grunted. "And informative," he added as his neck muscles strained against the arm wrapped around them. "In return, I feel obliged to remind you of the last village council meeting." Naruto frowned, as did the weirdo and damn near everyone else he could see. "What about it?" Misumi asked, pausing but not loosening his grip at all. "They cut funding to the hospital," Shikamaru replied in a bored tone. "What does that have to do with anything?" Misumi demanded, getting angry again. Shikamaru grunted as the man's limbs seemed to tighten even more. "Without that money, they haven't been able to stock up on some of the rarer antivenoms like the Wind Country King Scorpion Venom on the kunai I'm holding against your arm." There was a loud snapping sound as Misumi sprang away from his prey, limbs flying out in all directions. He landed in an awkward crouch as his joints realigned. He glared at Shikamaru, who spread empty hands before him. "You little liar!" he accused. Shikamaru shrugged as his hand reached into his pouch. "I bluffed, but these are real," he said as he hurled a pair of shuriken at Misumi's head. There was a cracking sound as his neck stretched upward, making the shuriken miss completely. "You missed, boy," Misumi sneered, his voice sounding really strange now. "I never intended to hit. Kagemain no jutsu." Shikamaru's shadow stretched out along the ground, merging with Misumi's shadow. As soon as contact was made, Misumi's body froze in place. Shikamaru moved his arms from a guard position to let them hang free at his sides. As he did this, Misumi's arms moved as well, perfectly mirroring the rookie's motions. Then Shikamaru inhaled deeply and bent forward rapidly at the waist. The stringy genin folded almost perfectly in half, his head facing his knees. With his disjointed neck stretching out due to the speed of the movement, Misumi's forehead struck the ground with a loud crack, making Naruto wince. No sooner did that happen than Shikamaru straightened and bent backwards in one motion. His back arched, the genin's palms struck the floor just like one of the flexibility exercises Irika-sensei had drilled them on in the academy. The back of the dazed Misumi's head struck the floor with an even louder thump. "Release," Shikamaru said, still bent backwards. The second his shadow detached from Misumi's, the older genin collapsed in a boneless heap. With a grunt, Shikamaru pushed off from the floor and straightened up, stretching as he did so. Naruto noted that the number one lazy bastard from his class hadn't even moved from his starting point. Shikamaru raised an eyebrow at Hate, cocking his head toward his unconscious opponent. Hate blinked twice. "Winner, Nara Shikamaru," he announced with an embarrassed cough. Everyone stared at Shikamaru as he slouched back toward the stairs leading to the observation deck. Even his own team was silent as he returned to his spot, leaning his elbows on the railing with a bored sigh. "You were actually good," Shika Ino said, eyes wide. She shook her head. "Not as cool as Sasuke-kun, but not bad at all." "How troublesome," Shikamaru murmured. Chuji offered him a bag of chips, but Shikamaru just shook his head. The medic needs took a little while getting Misumi loaded onto a stretcher. It seemed to Naruto that they were a little reluctant to touch his stretchy neck, making it hard to keep his head on the stretcher, and not dragging on the ground. In the end, they finally managed to get him out of there, and Hade asked for the next match to be displayed. Naruto felt a chill go down the back of his neck with the selection that was displayed, Hyuga Hinata vs. Hyuga Neji. He spun toward his teammate, who'd gone even paler than usual. Her eyes were a little wide, but her mouth took on a determined line as he looked at her. Something prompted him to speak before she walked away. "You can do this, Hinata," he said in a low voice. She paused, one foot lifted to take her first step. She gave him a single nod as her face took on an even more determined expression. Naruto watched her march down the stairs to the arena floor, feeling like there was something he should be doing. But he didn't know what. He glanced over at Kurenai-sensei, and while she didn't say anything, he could read her expressions well enough to know that she wasn't pleased with this matchup either. A voice from the opposite direction made Naruto jump. "This is most unfortunate." He spun around, surprised to see Shino already rejoining them, his arm bound in a light sling. Naruto just nodded, remembering how Neji had gone after his Kage Bunshin that had been to look like Hinata. While Hinata's posture could only be described as resolute as she marched to the center of the floor, Neji seemed almost unconcerned. Hinata dropped into a basic Juken guard position when Hate told them to begin, but Neji just stood there glaring at her. "You can't win, you know," the older Hyuga said in a matter-of-fact tone. "You have never defeated me in a sparring match. You don't have the physical or mental capacity to challenge me. If you surrender now, I will not be forced to harm a member of the main family, and you can return to your career as a mediocre kunoichi." It took a moment for Naruto to realize that the grinding sound was coming from his own molars. Surprisingly, Hinata showed almost no reaction to his words, other than minutely drawing her eyebrows together. "I have worked too hard to get here, cousin, and I refuse to disappoint my sensei or my team." Neji stared at her for a moment, and Naruto wondered if he was actually surprised by Hinata's words. She seemed nothing like the exhausted wreck he'd seen the morning after her family's special training. The next instant the Hyuga genius blurred into motion as he attacked. Hinata smoothly blocked and countered, and the two Juken users began an elaborate dance, punctuated with sharp bursts of chakra as they launched strikes designed to shred internal organs. Naruto's eyes could barely keep up with their movements, despite all the time he'd spent sparring with Hinata. This made him realize two things. The first was that Juken users are just as adept at fighting each other as those who practice other taijutsu styles, and in a peculiar way the moves almost seem to interlock. The second, more chilling realization, was that Neji was even faster than he thought. Hinata was holding her own, but Naruto feared she was just one misstep away from disaster. He could feel the chakra burst from where he stood, and they were nothing like the weaker spikes Hinata used when she sparred with him. Those blows would numb his arm for a short time, even shorter if he expended the chakra. These blows were intended to maim, if not kill. Still, Hinata held off her cousin's attacks, and her counterblows sometimes put him back on the defensive. Naruto wanted to cheer her on, but he was also afraid of distracting her at a fatal moment. As he watched, something began to bother him. The chakra behind Hinata's Juken strikes began to falter. It was almost like she was exhausting her reserves, but he knew from their sparring sessions that she had far more than she'd expended so far. He wondered if she was trying to lull Neji into getting overconfident, setting him up for a big hit. Maybe Shino wasn't the sneakiest shinobi on Team 8. Finally it happened. Hinata ducked under Neji's strike at her face, instead of blocking. Rather than making her eyeballs explode, the taller boy ended up with Hinata well inside his guard, and her palm's strike nailed him firmly in the stomach. She jumped back as Neji grunted, still on guard. But the older Hyuga just looked at her. And then he smiled. "You've lost," he said. Hinata frowned as her Byakugan seemed to release on its own, and Naruto noticed her flexing her hand and rubbing at her forearm. At her cousin's words, she pushed up the sleeve of her jacket, and Naruto saw that it was dotted with small chakra burns, corresponding with places he knew held points. It wasn't like he hadn't flushed his own out often enough. "Damn," he muttered under his breath. For Neji to be capable of doing that, during a fight like that, was pretty impressive. It also explained why Hinata couldn't focus chakra down her arms anymore. Hinata's eyes flickered towards the observation balcony, and for an instant she seemed to stare right into his eyes. Then she turned back to her cousin and her eyes hardened. The Byakugan was active again, but Naruto couldn't remember seeing her do the seals this time. Had she managed to do it without them? I am a shinobi of the leaf, Niji-san, she said, and a Hyuga. I do not give up. With that, she jumped backward, throwing a brace of shuriken as she did so. Niji dodged the barrage with a burst of speed that made Naruto even more anxious. You've picked a bad time to discover your pride, he said in a cold voice as he closed in on Hinata. Hinata evaded a strike to her chest by dropping to the ground and launching a leg sweep to knock Niji off his feet. Niji simply leapt backward, flipping to land on his feet and charged back in as a single movement. Hinata somersaulted backward and clashed her wrists together in a motion she and Naruto had practiced many times. She spun, palms out, but as each arm moved toward Niji, she dropped her hand flat into a knife hand and the weighted bracer flew off her wrist. Niji ducked backward, avoiding the first one, but the second struck him on the temple with stunning force. The Hyuga genius stumbled backward, a cut opened at the corner of one eye, as Hinata released the weights on her legs and kicked them toward him as well. However, despite their practice, Naruto knew either of them was as accurate flinging their leg weights, and Niji easily evaded both of them. I see you decided to resort to tricks to make up for your lack of skill, Niji sneered. But it won't help. You were born a failure, and you will die a failure, a blot on the honor of the main family. Hinata didn't respond verbally, but just swallowed as she settled into a Goken stance. Naruto knew she wasn't nearly as proficient in the style she'd only recently learned with Gai-sensei, but with her arms like that her Juken was pretty much useless to her. Niji's face began to lose its emotionless mask as he moved toward her, launching a series of blindingly fast attacks. But with her weights off, Hinata moved so fast that she was little more than a blur, making several people gasp, and Lee began to very quietly cheer her on. Naruto recognized several of her evasions as ones he'd worked out from sparring with her. Go Hinata! He roared, making everyone jump. Kick his ass! Naruto felt a hand latch onto his shoulder and quickly muttered, Sorry, sensei. Niji's expression grew even more frustrated as Hinata continued to dodge his Juken strikes. She improvised quick off-axis attacks, making him guard his footing and distracting him from predicting her next dodge. Naruto began to hope she'd pull this off. She managed to connect a few times, but her margin of error was so thin. Finally, it happened. Niji apparently allowed her to land a hammer fist strike to his ribs, not even trying to block but instead using that instant to land a Juken strike that speared into the left side of her back, below the shoulder blade. Niji stumbled back, clapping a hand to his side, where his rib was bruised, if not cracked. But Hinata fell to one knee and coughed, blood spattering the floor in front of where she knelt. She slowly toppled to one side, falling prone. So much for your tricks, Niji said in a dismissive tone as he turned away, and in that instant Naruto would gladly have ended his life. It looks like this match is over, Hate said in a voice that sounded slightly regretful. And no, the voice was faint, but unmistakably came from where Hinata lay. Niji spun back toward his cousin, his expression a mixture of frustration, annoyance, and something else that Naruto couldn't identify. Hinata painfully struggled to her feet. I'm not done with you yet, she said, her eyes fixed on her cousin. What followed next was one of the most painful and frustrating experiences of Naruto's life. Hinata could barely hold her Goken stance as Niji strode over to her. His fist snapped out and slammed into her jaw, sending her crashing to the ground. And she got up again. Niji punched her in the stomach, folding her up as he knocked her off her feet. He didn't even bother to use Juken anymore. The damage Hinata had taken rendered her barely able to stand, let alone defend herself. But she kept getting up again. Why do you keep getting up? Niji finally demanded. Do you want to die? Do you think that will make you less of a failure? Hinata slowly raised her head, meeting Niji's glare. You were destined to be the Hyuga failure from the day you were born, Niji snapped. I've seen that with my eyes from the first day I saw you. You cursed your own powerlessness and blamed yourself. But we all knew the truth, and you haven't changed at all. That is your destiny, accept it and stop this foolishness. You're wrong, Niji and I-san, Hinata said between shuddering breaths. She paused to cough up a little more blood. She wiped her mouth and cocked her head to one side, looking past her cousin. I can see that you are hurting worse than I am. You hate yourself even more than you hate me. Niji let out a strangled cry of rage as Hinata's eyes rolled back in her head and her legs began to buckle. Time seemed to stand still as hate yelled for him to stop. There was a sudden rush of air and Naruto dimly realized that Kurenai-sensei had launched herself off the balcony. But his eyes were locked onto the slowly toppling form of his friend and teammate, falling even as sure death approached her. Naruto wasn't even aware of his fingers forming seals, but suddenly he was there, half deafened by a thunderous pop and gritting his teeth against the spike of pain that seemed to have been rammed through his chest. Naruto stumbled backward, clutching his chest. Hate seemed to have been caught flat-footed, but Kurenai-sensei, Kakashi, and Gai-sensei all had a hold of Hyuga Niji, whose palms still glowed from the chakra spike that had struck Naruto. The so-called genius was bitterly protesting favoritism being shown to the main house, but Naruto ignored him. Up on the balcony where Naruto had been standing, Hinata crumpled to the ground. Shino grabbed her, keeping her head from striking the balcony, but she was still unconscious. Bloody froth bubbled at the corner of her mouth. Medics! Now! Shino yelled in a loud voice that made everyone jump. Naruto's chest hurt like hell, but he straightened up enough to limp over to the stairs, trailing behind the scrambling medics. He stopped when Kurenai grabbed his shoulder. Stay out of their way, she said in a quiet voice, her eyes glued on Shino as he supported Hinata's head and helped the medic Nins load her onto a stretcher. Naruto nodded, slowly straightening and wiping the blood from his chin. He watched the medics carry the stretcher down off the balcony at a fast trot. The haste with which they moved chilled his blood. Her wounds were likely to be at least as serious as he had feared. As they passed him, he couldn't help but stare at his friend's face. Her skin had gone as pale as snow and the rise and fall of her chest was barely perceptible. Naruto felt a sudden spike of killing intent from behind him, seemingly coinciding with Gai's voice. He spun around. Niji's face was a frozen mask of fury as he was remonstrated by his Jounin sensei, and suddenly Naruto wanted nothing more than to rip that bastard's throat out with his teeth. The light in the arena seemed to take on a reddish tone as his fingernails dug into his palms, drawing blood. Naruto was dimly aware of startled glances coming from Kakashi as well as Gai, but it was Kurenai's words that sunk in. Calm down and we'll follow Hinata to the infirmary, she all but whispered in his ear. Naruto spun on his heel and took off after the medic Nins, ignoring the blood dripping from his fists. Shino watched the rest of his team leave. While he might have preferred to follow them, it would serve no logical purpose. Also, there were still several shinobi present in the room that possessed unknown capabilities. He could best serve his team by staying and making careful observations. He had qualified for the next round, and he had little doubt that Naruto would as well, so any information he might glean could prove vital. But that didn't mean he had to like it. Maito Gai had removed Hyuga Niji from the room, which was fortunate. There were several individuals present that did not appreciate his actions, and candor required that he admit he was one of them. It would not do for them to begin the next set of matches before the preliminaries concluded, as he doubted that such eagerness would be appreciated by the examiners. Glancing around, he noticed that both Rock Lee and Tenten were staring at him. Looking down, he realized that there was a fine spray of aspirated blood across the front of his jacket. Hinata's blood. He looked back up. What variety of flowers would be appropriate? He asked in the calmest, most matter-of-fact tone of voice he could muster. What? Tenten asked, rubbing a bruise on the side of her head that she'd sustained in her loss to Temari. To their credit, both of them appeared upset with the outcome of the last match, but Shino still had a point to make. For your teammate's funeral, he clarified. Lee paled. Naruto followed as long as he could, but suddenly the medics started shouting and carried Hinata's stretcher through a pair of swinging doors marked for authorized personnel only. Kurenai-sensei grabbed his shoulder again, halting him in his tracks. We'll only be in the way, she murmured before she turned to one of the attendants. Naruto looked down, taking some deep breaths and resisting the urge to leap through the doors anyway. His palms ached a little, but despite the blood caked on his hands, they were unmarked and his chest felt like it was getting back to normal. He felt guilty as hell, like he let someone down, but he couldn't see what he should have done differently. Did telling Hinata to kick Niji's ass make her want to keep fighting long after she couldn't? Was it wrong for him to encourage her? Had his Kawarimi no jutsu hurt her worse, or was it more important that Niji not hit her again? Niji. Hyuga Niji. Hinata's own cousin tried to kill her. Was he mad about something to do with their clan? What was that crap about the main family anyway? How the hell could he blame her for that? It wasn't like she was in charge of that crappy family. Was he just taking it out on her because he could? Naruto shook his head. He didn't really care why that creep had a vendetta against Hinata. What he did know was that he was going to beat that bastard like a drum and make his hair bleed. No one hurt his friends, especially Hinata. Naruto looked up, blinking. Where had that thought come from? He felt a hand on his elbow and spun around. Kurenai-sensei didn't even blink, but began speaking as soon as she had his attention. Naruto, I'm going to stay down here with Hinata, but I need you to go back to the auditorium. Naruto shook his head, but she cut him off before he could speak. I know you want to stay here, but you still haven't had your preliminary match yet. If you stay down here you will be disqualified, she reminded him. That's not important, Naruto said in a stubborn tone. You won't get a chance to fight Niji if you don't advance, Kurenai reminded him. He'll probably say you stayed down here to get disqualified because you were afraid to face him. Naruto had to give his sensei credit. She was pretty good at putting the screws to people when she wanted to. He let out a sigh that sounded more like a growl. Kurenai sighed as well. All right, Naruto. What do you think Hinata will think if you stay down here because she was hurt? It didn't take much imagination to figure that out. She'll think it was her fault I was disqualified, he said in a resigned tone. Right, Naruto, Kurenai agreed, and that's not something she needs to deal with while she's recovering. The nurse says they got her here just in time, and they do need to do some serious work before she regains consciousness. I know you and Shino will both want to be here when she wakes up, so beat whoever you have to fight quickly. Naruto nodded. Yes, sensei. He said loudly enough to draw a glare from the attendant before he ran back down the hallway. Naruto entered the auditorium just in time to see both Ino and Sakura being helped off the floor. Both of them looked pretty shaky and he wondered who won. He made his way over to Shino as quickly as he could without drawing too much attention. She's in surgery now, Naruto said in response to the unspoken question. Kurenai-sensei thinks she's going to be okay, but they got her there just in time and she'll be out for a while. Shino nodded and his posture seemed to loosen a little, though it might just have been Naruto's imagination. You only missed one match, Shino said, nodding toward the two battered kunoichi. Double knockout, he added. Naruto blinked. He wondered how the hell they managed that. But his attention was diverted by the display for the next match, Uchiha Sasuke vs Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto glanced over at Sasuke, who just smirked back at him. Naruto frowned. The genin was rolling the shoulder that he remembered the curse seal being on. Kurenai assured him it had been dealt with, but he wondered. Naruto quickly knelt down next to Shino, adjusting his sandal. While he was bent over, he hit the releases on his arm and leg weights, leaving them in a pile next to his teammate. When he straightened up, Sasuke was leaving the stairs and Hate was frowning at him, so Naruto just vaulted the railing. Of course, without his weights, he went considerably farther than he expected and landed badly off balance. Sasuke just rolled his eyes while Hate cleared his throat. Can't you do anything right dead last? Sasuke asked him in a superior tone as he slid back into an advanced taijutsu stance. Naruto ignored him, knowing the Uchiha just wanted him angry and off balance. But that didn't help one bit when he heard his opponent's next words. I hope you put up a better fight than your pathetic teammate. Naruto looked up at Sasuke, his rage returning. Sasuke smirked, evidently pleased that his barb had struck home. Begin! Hate commanded. Shino winced as he witnessed the Uchiha's attempt at psychological warfare. While it was a valid tactic in many circumstances, this wasn't one he'd personally recommend. When the examiner said begin, there was a green blur of motion that ended in a loud crack. Naruto was standing in the space formerly occupied by the Uchiha, fist extended. Shino noticed that his eyes were a much darker shade of blue than normal, almost a deep purple. As for Sasuke, he was flying backwards, landing in a boneless heap 3.5 meters behind his starting position. There was a large lump already forming on the side of his jaw as he bounced once before sliding to a halt. To Shino's untrained eye, it was quite apparent that the last Uchiha had sustained a broken jaw. Gekuhate stared at the clearly unconscious boy as the one who struck him turned and began marching toward the exit. Clearing his throat, he announced, "Winner, Uzumaki Naruto." Naruto knew the way to the infirmary now, so he had a much better time on his second trip. Kurenai-sensei was still waiting near the surgery unit, so he sat down beside her. She looked at the clock and frowned. "I fought Sasuke," he said as he sat down. She sighed, patted him awkwardly on the shoulder, and went back to staring at the clock. After nearly 20 minutes, Naruto was about to climb the walls. His fidgeting grew noisier and noisier until Kurenai gave him a sharp look, and he forcibly stilled himself. Looking away, he saw Shino leading Gai-sensei, and a wobbly-looking Lee. "The matches are concluded," Shino said with no preamble. "I will share my observations as needed. How is our comrade?" "No word yet," Naruto answered with a frown. An attendant approached Guy, and over his protest Lee was led away for an X-ray. Naruto wondered why Sasuke hadn't been brought down here, or whether he'd be treated on the spot. Maybe he should have hit him harder. A moment later, Guy returned and nodded to Kurenai. "Thank you for the information regarding that Sand Genin. Lee had to fight him, and even with the celestial gates open, he could not land a decisive blow. Without our extra endurance training, I'm not sure he could have fought as long as he did." "What happened to Lee?" Naruto asked. When the fires of Lee's youth began to run out of fuel, this Sabaku no Gara was able to catch him a glancing blow with his sand and hurl him against the wall. Guy reported in a distressed voice. Naruto realized that seeing Lee unable to win, despite all his hard work, was physically painful for his sensei. "I was forced to intervene before he was severely injured." "I'm sure Lee knows you did the right thing," Kurenai assured him, looking a bit uncomfortable herself. "Yes, but when he is recovered we will run 1,000 laps around Konoha, backward, on our hands," Guy assured her. Shino nodded to Naruto. With that match, Kankuro from the sand was not required to fight. "I will share my observations on the others as needed, but the matches for the next round in a month have already been selected. You will fight Hyuga-Niji." Kurenai-sensei's eyes widened in surprise. Naruto's disgruntlement over the sand guy's luck dissipated as a beatific grin spread across his face. Chapter 15. Hinata awoke in a haze of pain. Her chest ached so much it took an active will just to inhale. The air she inhaled was redolent of medicinal smells. She almost choked on the cloying odors, but just imagining how much coughing would hurt made her throat relax. She cracked open sleep-gummed eyes to see a hand wreathed in glowing blue-green chakra rest lightly on the blanket over her sternum. As the glow flared, the pain eased, just a little. After a moment, she realized she was in a hospital. Then she remembered the fight with Niji. No matter how hard she tried, no matter how determined she was, she still couldn't defeat her cousin. She'd been so hopeful going into that fight. She trained so hard, learned so many new things. This was her chance to prove that she had changed, just a little. But in the end, her father was right. She was nothing but a stain on the main family. Better that she'd died and left no reminder of her legacy of failures. For that matter, she was honestly surprised she'd survived. Her last memory was Niji charging at her in response to her final words. She'd already recognized the signs of internal injuries and knew that her hard work had been for nothing, just like the rest of her meaningless life. But she'd wanted to leave her cousin with something besides the bitterness that she could see was consuming him. It wasn't his fault she was a weakling born into his proper place within the clan. Trying to remember was so hard, but she thought there might have been a familiar surge of chakra and a sense of motion. Everything else was blackness. Hinata tried to shift a little under the starchy hospital bedding, but a renewed surge of pain demonstrated the folly of that. She hadn't even managed to die with honor after publicly demonstrating that the Hyuga branch family was stronger than the main family. It didn't matter that Niji was a year older, her father's daughter should have prevailed. Instead, she had publicly humiliated him. Hinata let her eyes fall closed and wished for the death she'd been denied. Naruto didn't know which was worse, waiting at the hospital or waiting at home. He supposed he should be grateful that Kurenai-sensei made the decision for him. She sent him home under orders after 3 days of waiting for Hinata to wake up. He supposed he was getting a little ripe, but she'd also ordered him to stay out of the hospital until she sent for him. He and Shino were excused from missions to prepare for the Chunin exam finals. His teammate was planning to spend most of his time working with his parents in their specialties, but for once Naruto didn't really feel like training. He'd become so used to practicing with Hinata that it felt wrong somehow to train without her. Maybe it was a good thing that Guy wasn't really giving him any choice in the matter. He and Lee were waiting for him outside his apartment when he woke up the next morning. For once, Guy wasn't his normal, completely over-the-top self. Instead, he somewhat somberly informed Naruto that Kurenai wished to be on hand when Hinata woke up. Naruto nodded when he heard that. She'd assured him that she or Irika-sensei would be there for her. But then Guy went on to say that Naruto's warning about Sabaka no Gaara prevented Lee from being seriously injured during their match. Thus, they owed Naruto a debt of honor and would discharge this obligation by helping him fan the fires of his youth in preparation for the finals. Naruto noticed that neither of them mentioned Niji. He wasn't about to bring up the bastard either. But if he thought early mornings with the Guy and Lee show were strenuous, adding noon and evening sparring sessions was downright insane. And even if he managed to tire Lee out, Guy would have him do cooldowns while he tested Naruto's power of youth himself. The first time this happened, Naruto realized what a pachinko ball felt like. But it did keep him from worrying about his teammate. Guy-sensei worked him so hard the rest of that first week that each night he fell asleep the instant his head hit the pillow. Shino spun the kamas in his hands as he settled into a modified back stance. While the motions served no intrinsic purpose, they did demonstrate a degree of manual dexterity and expertise that could serve to intimidate potential foes. While normally it was better to conceal one's capabilities, there were circumstances in which overt demonstrations can achieve mission objectives without necessitating excessive violence. Not that there weren't occasions in which violence was preferable. Not for the last time, he envied Naruto's opponent's selection in the upcoming finals. Irrational behavior was not something appreciated by any Abirame, and Shino was no exception to this. When that behavior resulted in serious injury to his teammates, he found himself desiring a role in undertaking the appropriate corrective action. While there was a slim probability that he would meet Niji in the finals, Naruto would first have to lose to the Hyuga prodigy, something he did not wish to see happen. Aside from the implications for team morale, he did not think Naruto would let anything stop him short of death or incapacitating injury. But if the worst happened, he would be ready. He cleared his mind and began the next kata, his blades a blur of motion. The third Hokage set aside the scroll he was reading with a sigh. It was the third petition he'd received in a week concerning the results of the preliminary matches. Each was worded differently, but they all suggested, in various diplomatic terms, that he adjust the results to address some obvious errors. Oddly enough, none of the apparent authors of these missives were shinobi, though he was certain at least one of them may have been prompted by one of the major clans. He noticed a certain turn of phrase, uphold the honor of Konoha, that sounded a lot like Hyuga Hayashi. But for the most part, shinobi took the rank examinations very seriously. Indeed, their own status was based upon fitness certified by these tests, showing any sort of favoritism threw the whole system into question. But to other residents of the village, the rank exams were political exercises. He himself explained that to the examinees a week ago. The performance of the genin reflected glory on their home village. Strong shinobi implied a strong village, which meant more and better contracts in the future. But the civilians also understood clan politics and prestige as well. In previous generations, the Uchiha clan had helped carry Konoha to glory and prosperity. The loss of almost every member of that clan was a blow that was only dwarfed by the attack of the Kyuubi nearly a decade before that. The fact that Konoha still retained a surviving heir was some consolation, and it suited many people's sense of appropriateness that the sole remaining Uchiha showed signs of great skill and ability. To such people, Uchiha Sasuke's elimination in the preliminary round was practically a blow to their personal aspirations. No matter that it was almost unheard of for a rookie genin to pass the Chunin exam, it was only due to their skill that he and his team were even allowed to enter. Such people, ignorant of why the examination must be rigorous, wished to see the rules bent for their favorite. That way, they could continue to boast of the invincible Uchiha genius that was the pride of their village. Sandaime shook his head ruefully. To the genin's credit, he didn't think Sasuke would accept any favors, even if they were offered. By all reports, Hatake Kakashi was training his team harder than ever after they were eliminated from the Chunin exam, and only Uchiha Sasuke had refrained from commenting on the grueling pace. Any appearance of coddling or favoritism now would only inflame his wounded pride. For that matter, this whole situation may have been a good thing for Team 7's sensei as well. Yuhi Kurenai was not given to excessive boasting, but he was sure she'd made at least a few pointed remarks to the collie that seemed to exasperate her most. It probably didn't help that the one who defeated the Uchiha prodigy was the village pariah. One of the more offensive messages he'd received argued that of course Naruto had to have drawn on the demon caged within him to beat the Uchiha. Thus it was only fair that he be disqualified and the victory awarded to Sasuke. Even putting aside the issue of how to explain such a decision to the genin without violating his own rule, the Hokage was offended that they thought Naruto could use the demon's chakra without anyone noticing. Kage sighed. High-ranking ninja from more than one village had been watching the matches with considerable interest. Did that simpleton think no one had even considered the possibility? Not for the first time, the Hokage wondered if it was such a good idea to let non-shinobi citizens have such a large say in the running of the village. Starting during his first term, and continued during the fourth reign, the civilians and village council were encouraged to take a more active role in managing Konoha than was typical in a hidden village. These greater freedoms and political stakes had paid off in many ways. Konoha's economy was much more active and robust than usual for a ninja village. This went hand in hand with a steadily increasing population and higher quality of life. But at the same time, these newly empowered villagers had been given the power to ask inappropriate questions, the power to poke their noses into things that were really not their concern. More than once he'd discussed the ramifications of what they were doing with his successor. But every time Sarutobi started to question the wisdom of their course, the blonde-haired man who would sacrifice everything for Konoha stayed firm in his convictions. He reminisced about infiltration missions he'd taken to Iwakugure, and how the common villagers lived in fear of their shinobi. They had no rights under the harsh laws of stone, and their lives reflected this. The farther away we are from their path, he insisted, the better off we are. Amazingly, the IWA leadership still didn't understand why their villagers were only half as productive as those of their rival in the Land of Fire. It was indeed a painful irony that those villagers would use that freedom to persecute Yandame's legacy, but the old man supposed it was inevitable. Giving people freedom meant also giving them the freedom to behave foolishly. He shook his head wearily. At least he could accord this latest proposal with all the respect it deserved, he thought as he dropped it into a wastebasket. The second time Hinata regained consciousness, the pain was much less than it had been before. She could now take shallow breaths without stabbing pains that seemed to go right through her. The skin of her face felt cool and her eyes were clear of secretions. Someone had recently wiped her face with a damp cloth. She willed her eyes to focus, trying to make out details in the dimly lit hospital room. "Hinata?" a voice quietly spoke. She shifted her eyes in the direction of the sound, making out a vague profile that looked like her sensei. This was getting a little frustrating. Her constant failures aside, Hinata was used to having fairly acute vision. It was a legacy of the Byakugan that almost no Hyuga suffered from normal vision defects. The figure took a step forward and she could see that it was, in fact, her sensei. "Don't try to use your eyes," she said in a somber voice. "Your bed is under a chakra-suppressing seal. Some of your inner coils were damaged and the medic needs don't want to risk a rupture before they are fully repaired." Hinata let out a tiny sigh. The fact that such extreme measures had to be taken only underlined how badly she'd failed. "I'm sorry," she said in a very small voice. Kurenai-sensei nodded. "I know, but it's not just me you need to apologize to." Hinata swallowed. "Yes. I humiliated my father. And I don't think you are sorry for the correct reasons," her sensei continued. Hinata fell silent, looking at her teacher and feeling even more stupid and useless. "You fought well," Kurenai said. "I and the other Jonin sensei were impressed by the gains you have made. Guy claims you have the youthful potential of genius, whatever that means." For a moment, Hinata allowed herself to believe her sensei, and the sick weight of guilt on her spirit seemed to lighten for a moment. But the memory of her father's face brought her back to reality. No matter how well others might think she had done, she had failed to live up to the standards of her clan. Kurenai leaned forward a little more and Hinata noticed that her expression was one of stern disapproval. "I do, however, find myself questioning your judgment." "As sensei?" she asked, hating herself for the quaver in her voice. At the end of the fight, she clarified, when you kept getting up again. You couldn't even defend yourself at that point. Did you actually believe you still had a chance to defeat your cousin? Hinata thought back to that time. She'd been in so much pain that the idea of launching an attack was ludicrous, really. But she couldn't bear the thought of failing again, failing in front of everyone, her teacher, her teammates. Naruto. Staying down meant adding to her legacy of failures. She would not stay down. Not again. She'd rather. Staring off into the distance, she glanced back at Kurenai-sensei's face and slowly shook her head. Were you trying to die? Kurenai asked in a voice that was little more than a whisper. Hinata stared at her teacher, those words freezing her in place. She tried to shake her head, to deny them, but she couldn't. At the time, she honestly would rather have died than live with such a failure. Ending it all was preferable to what would happen afterward, proving her father correct, again seeing the disappointment in everyone's faces, no matter how hard they tried to hide it. Evidently Hinata's lack of response was answer enough, because Kurenai-sensei sighed and leaned back in her chair. That's what I thought, she said after a moment. Hinata, you need to listen to me and pay close attention. Right now I'm not sure I will ever be able to certify you to return to active duty. Hinata felt like her stomach was encased in a block of ice. Are my injuries that bad? She asked. It's not your physical injuries I'm concerned about, Kurenai clarified. It's your state of mind. I can't have someone on my team that places no value on her own life. Hinata could only stutter out, I am sorry, sensei. Kurenai just shrugged. I suppose it's more my fault than yours. I should have realized this sooner. I just thought you actually cared about your teammates. That accusation tore through Hinata's heart like a kunai. Sensei. She gasped with just a touch of outrage. She might be a perpetual failure, but no one could say she didn't care for her teammates. No one should be able to say she cared for them more than her family, at times. More than anything, really. Kurenai cocked her head and peered down at Hinata, making her feel like one of Shino's new acquisitions. Did you ever consider the effect that your death would have on them? She asked. Naruto was so worried about you that he nearly forfeited his match because he didn't want to leave the infirmary. Shino is just as upset, in his own way, and I understand that he made a public death threat against your cousin. Hinata froze as her mind tried to wrap itself around this new information. To be honest, she didn't think Naruto would react so strongly, but she still damned herself for her thoughtlessness. No matter that she wasn't thinking clearly during the fight, too much was going on, too much was at stake. She'd forgotten her team in her rush to prove herself to her father. Hyuga or not, that was inexcusable. But Kurenai wasn't finished. And now Naruto will face Neji in his first match of the finals, and I'm fairly sure he intends to kill him, no matter if it disqualifies him. Shino doesn't care so much about his foes as the chance that he might face Neji as well to avenge you. These are the people you forgot about when you faced your cousin. These are the people that you thought wouldn't care if you got yourself killed. Hinata felt something snap within her. Suddenly the bedclothes were too tight as she levered herself up on her elbows, ignoring the spasms of pain in her chest. Why do they care? She heard herself asking in a rasping growl that made her want to cough. Why should anyone care if a failure like me dies? I'm useless. I'm worthless. I can't beat my cousin. I can't even beat my little sister. I never do anything right. It would be better if I was dead, or never even born, so they'd have someone useful in my place. Her rant dissolved in a flurry of coughing that left her curled on her side with a coppery taste flooding the back of her mouth. She barely noticed a hand gripping her shoulder as the coughing subsided. Who told you that you are worthless? Kurenai asked in a softer voice. Hinata tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She felt her face reddening. She was mortified by her outburst. What possessed her to say such things, even if they were true? Kurenai-sensei would have no choice but to remove her from the team now. She would never get to see Naruto or Shino again. As Hinata struggled to get her breathing under control again, Kurenai-sensei helped her sit up. Her sensei wiped a cloth across her lips that came away with a faint smear of pink. Don't speak, Kurenai commanded her, just nod. Did your father tell you these things? Hesitantly, Hinata nodded. That is no surprise to me. I find him to be a cruel and spiteful man, Kurenai said in an angry voice. Hinata felt a surge of guilt because she didn't argue with her. Being the leader of the clan required him to be demanding at times, even harsh. But it was all for the good of the clan, wasn't it? You told me once that he has a very low opinion of Naruto, Kurenai continued. Do you think he is correct in that hatred as well? Hinata shook her head, but frowned. Her father hardly knew Naruto, but he'd raised her from infancy. Surely he knew her better. I can see you are not convinced, Kurenai said with a sigh. Who do you spend the most time with every day? You know the answer as well as I do. Hinata swallowed and nodded. Training with Naruto, hours each day, was something she'd only dreamed could happen when they attended the Konoha Ninja Academy. The thought of losing that if Kurenai-sensei removed her from the team was unthinkable. Good, Kurenai said. Would Naruto agree with your father? And given how much time you spend with each other, who would you say has the more accurate estimation of your ability? Hinata froze in place, not even breathing for a moment. Unbidden, a memory of Naruto's words echoed through her mind. Hinata, you rock. She wanted to dismiss the question. She knew Naruto was nice to almost everyone. But was it possible that Naruto knew her better than her father? Maybe instead of being a constant failure, she did rock, even just a little? Kurenai stood up. I'll leave you to think about that, Hinata. I'll hold off on making any decisions regarding your status for now, but you should give serious thought to what we've talked about. Hinata nodded slowly and lay back on the bed as her sensei faded into the shadows of the room. She barely heard the door open and close. How much better your life would have been, Kurenai whispered as she closed the door, if your father had died, instead of your mother. She took a deep breath as she made her way down the corridor. The medicinal smells that clung to hospitals the world over made her faintly nauseous. Her mind replayed the look on Hinata's face when she delivered her ultimatum, and her stomach rebelled. Only the iron self-control of it kept her face expressionless as she made her way to the bathrooms. Once the door was closed and she was sure she was alone, Kurenai bolted for one of the stalls and promptly emptied her stomach. Wiping her mouth, she tried to forget the desolate look in her student's eyes, the raw, writhing emotion on the girl's face when she regurgitated her father's hateful words. Tears stung in red eyes that had spurned such things in years gone by. Cruel necessities, no matter how needful, were still cruel. Hyuga Niji fell back into a ready stance, waiting for his teacher to attack. He had been informed, the day after the preliminary matches, that Hayashi-sama would be taking personal charge of his training in the month leading up to the finals. Gai-sensei accepted this with barely more than a nod. His Jonin instructor had been rather cool toward him since the match with his cousin. While highly skilled, Maito Gai did not understand how things worked within the Hyuga clan, nor did he appear to care. Niji was acutely aware of the unusual interest his uncle expressed in his development, leading to his inclusion in training normally only given to main family members. This led to some very discreet whispering among the Hyuga elders, but Niji's growing prowess silenced any complaints. Being the top rookie of his year was an accomplishment, even for a Hyuga. Not even his cousin in the main family had managed that. Niji suppressed a twinge as Hayashi-sama lunged toward him. He spun into a picture-perfect Juken block. Nothing less would have sufficed. Thinking about the match with Hinata made him uncomfortable. Aside from his lapse in composure at the end, it had suitably showcased his capabilities. A main family ninja once considered the heir to the clan had only landed one significant blow before she was defeated. He smoothly slid into a counter-strike his teacher avoided with ease. Niji's anger in response to her inappropriate words at the end of the match was far overshadowed by her own emotional displays. Her almost desperate desire to defeat him was inappropriate for a shinobi representing a clan that prided itself on having firm emotional control. The Uchiha insanity would not strike at the foremost of Konoha's shinobi clans. Hayashi's last strike wasn't fully deflected and Niji felt the muscles in his forearm burn as a bruise formed. He neither knew nor cared why Hinata was so desperate to beat him, nor why she had kept getting up after her defeat was sealed along with her, but he knew he had done nothing wrong. Her own father had commended him on his performance in the preliminary matches, and Niji knew he was less than pleased with hers. Not only had he not been to the hospital, but he forbade any other clan members from seeing her before she was released. Niji knew that some branch family members, especially women who had known her mother, privately expressed sympathy for the discarded heir. Of course, a true heir would scorn such expressions of useless sentiment. Back on the attack, Niji began another combo, but hesitated slightly on the last blow, hoping his teacher's block would follow the normal timing. It almost worked, but all he ended up with was a bruised wrist as Hayashi turned the blow aside. That earned a slight nod from the clan leader. This was an acceptable variation on traditional forms, unlike all the tricks Hinata had used to try and beat him, something he knew Hayashi-sama was less than pleased to learn of. Still, the reactions of his peers were somewhat disquieting. Lee, while little more than a parody of their Jonin instructor, was still competent within his limited range of capabilities. Moreover, Tenten was one of the more accomplished kunoichi of their generation. Their defeats in the preliminaries were due to unfortunate matchups rather than lack of ability. Each faced an opponent that possessed skills that effectively neutralized their specialties. For that matter, it was Hinata's fate to meet a more competent Juken user in her match. But both of them had exhibited the same quiet disapproval as Gai-sensei, as if he had done something wrong or shameful. It was unfortunate that they did not seem to understand how things worked in the real world. If you fought someone stronger, you were destined to lose, and railing against the nature of things would only lead to worse injury. He learned that lesson the last time he saw his father alive. The only way to avoid this was to harden one's heart and become as strong as possible. Anything else was foolishness, and being a shinobi allowed no room for such things. If they could not come to understand this, then he would be forced to request a transfer once he became a chunin. It was interesting to note that Tenten, before shunning him along with the others, did see fit to warn him that Hinata's teammates were extremely angry about the injuries he'd inflicted during her defeat. Both would likely seek revenge when he faced them. Niji thanked her for the information, but didn't consider it very important. They would face him and, angry or not, they would be defeated. It was their fate. Naruto couldn't suppress a twinge of nervousness when Kurenai appeared at the end of his morning session with Guy and Lee. It took some effort not to rush through Guy's cool-down exercises and go see what Kurenai-sensei wanted, but he ground his teeth and stuck to the routine. Guy-sensei had lectured both him and Lee on the importance of both stretching and doing proper cooldowns, and making him repeat that lecture would only delay things more. Finally, when they were dismissed, Naruto hustled over to see his Jonin-sensei. "I see you are still improving," she said in an approving tone that made Naruto's face heat up, just a little. "I'm still trying to catch up to Lee," he said honestly. Despite his loss to Gaara in the preliminary match, Lee still dominated the beginnings of their sparring sessions, putting Naruto on the defensive until his greater stamina came into play. Considering that Sabaka no Gaara had done the same, according to Shino, Naruto worried, just a little. "If that is the standard by which you choose to measure yourself, then I think you will continue to improve," Kurenai replied. "Guy-sensei's offer to train you this much is very generous. Make the most of this for now. I will concentrate on gathering as much information as possible on the opponents you and Shino will face in the finals, especially this Gaara person. Closer to the matches we will meet to work out what strategies and techniques will prove most effective." It took a moment for Naruto to digest that. His sensei was being especially enigmatic today. Finally, he just nodded to acknowledge her words. He missed her team training sessions, but she had a point. Plus, it would be a little awkward since he and Shino might end up fighting each other at some point. Anyway, finding out how to beat Gaara would be worth it, let alone Niji. "I thought you would want to know that Hinata is well enough to receive visitors today," his teacher announced, pulling him out of his reverie. Naruto smiled with relief. "Can we go see her now?" he asked quickly. Kurenai nodded and they began walking toward the center of town. On a sudden impulse, Naruto created a shadow clone and handed it some money. "A double order of miso ramen to go meet us at the hospital," he ordered. As the clone sped off, he called after it. "It's for Hinata, so stay out of it." When he turned back to his sensei, she had a curious expression on her face. "You've certainly become rather casual with that technique," she observed. Naruto shrugged. "It's useful sometimes. And the more I practice it, the better I seem to get with it. Besides, I know that hospital food sucks." "I don't disapprove," Kurenai-sensei said. "I just don't think most have considered uses for that technique outside of missions. And how do you know about hospital food?" Naruto shrugged. "I was there once when I was a kid. I think a brick fell on my head or something. I don't remember very well. The only thing I do remember clearly is wanting to get out of there because the food tasted awful." Kurenai-sensei nodded thoughtfully, and they were quiet until they reached the hospital. An annoyed-looking clone was waiting for them, holding a bag. "Konohamaru almost popped me and spilled this," the clone growled as it handed Naruto the food. I told the brat that if he ruined Hinata-chan's food with one of his games, she'd let the missing means keep him next time. Naruto made a face when the clone dispersed itself, and he received the memories. What a potty mouth, he muttered. He hoped no one saw him chewing out the Hokage's grandson like that. When he turned back, Kurenai-sensei had the oddest expression on her face. Any worries about foul-mouthed clones disappeared from Naruto's mind when he saw his teammate lying on a hospital bed. He'd always thought of Hinata as strong, he wasn't kidding when he said she kicked butt as a ninja. But seeing her like this, she was so small. Has someone done a shrinking on her? Or did she just look bigger in his memories? He supposed it was the latter, because he was also struck by how still she was. She appeared to be napping, with only the motion of her slow breaths keeping him from thinking the worst. A sudden spike of white-hot rage bloomed in the pit of his stomach. He was going to make Niji pay for hurting her. He supposed he must have released a little of that killing intent stuff Kurenai had explained to them about, because Hinata's eyes suddenly popped open. Embarrassed, he quickly stifled his anger. He didn't want to upset Hinata or make her feel worse. "And Naruto?" she asked in a thick voice as she sat up and rubbed at her eyes. For an instant Naruto was struck by how cute she looked doing that, scrubbing at her eyes with the back of her hand like a little kid, nothing like the graceful kunoichi that sparred with him. He shook his head. She wouldn't appreciate him making fun of her either. "I brought ramen," he announced after an awkward pause, holding up the bag. Hinata blinked. The nurses had eyed his burden rather dubiously as they exited the elevator, but Kurenai-sensei did that scowling but not really scowling thing and they didn't say anything. Hinata gave him a tremulous smile as Naruto carefully placed the bag on her bedside table and opened it. He carefully handed her the covered container and a pair of chopsticks. She straightened up a little more, smoothing the blankets, and then peered at the bag. "Aren't you going to have some?" she asked. "Nah," Naruto said, "I'm not really hungry." Hinata froze in place, staring at him. That is," Naruto babbled quickly, "I'm going to get some later. I just got done sparring with Lee and I need to let my stomach settle. You know that lotus thing, right?" Hinata nodded slowly and then cracked open the container. The reek of medicinal smells and disinfectants was swept away by the fragrant steam of hot ramen broth. Naruto considered this a vast improvement, and his salivary glands agreed. Next time he was going to find a way to sneak in an order big enough for both of them to eat. Trying to distract himself from his annoying stomach, he glanced at the bag and noticed it wasn't completely empty. "Hey," Naruto said as he pulled a folded piece of paper from the bag. "I stuck a note in there. It says she hopes you get well soon. Isn't that?" His words cut off when he looked back at Hinata and saw her lower lip trembling. Her head bent forward as her hands began to shake. Naruto rescued the ramen and put it back on the table as she sniffed loudly. "Hinata? What's wrong? Is it the—" His words were cut off when Hinata let out a low cry and buried her face in her hands. Naruto looked back at Kurenai-sensei for help, but there was no longer standing in the doorway. The door itself was closed, and he considered going to get a nurse for help, but he didn't think Hinata would appreciate that. He remembered how Ayam took Hinata aside to help her get cleaned up. He needed to help her without embarrassing her. He had to. This was his friend. It would really help if he'd known what to do. He gingerly sat on the edge of the bed and awkwardly patted her shoulder, but that seemed to have no effect. "Nay, Hinata, it's okay?" he asked, feeling like a complete idiot. Why didn't they cover this in the academy? Most of the boys in his class ended up teamed with a girl, and girls cried, right? Why didn't Irika-sensei tell us what to do when that happened? Maybe that psychologist guy was supposed to tell us that privately, and he screwed me there too. "Hinata, don't cry," he finally said, surprising himself with the pleading tone that came out of his mouth. He really hated this. He hated seeing her upset, almost as much as seeing her hurt. Niji was going home from the finals in a damn body bag if he could manage it. No. He didn't need to be angry right now. That wouldn't help. He tried patting her back, but that didn't help either. She was shaking like a leaf. "I'm sorry," Hinata wailed. And suddenly her hands were fisted in the material of his jacket as she held onto him like she was drowning and he was a life preserver. "For what?" Naruto asked, feeling stupid. He felt like he was only getting about half of this conversation. The padding wasn't working. That wasn't a surprise since she was an Akamaru. "I am an idiot," he thought. It wasn't working. What was wrong with his brain? Hinata was still crying. He gingerly settled his forearms across her shoulders in a sorta hug. Twisted around like this wasn't very physically comfortable, which was fine because it wasn't comfortable in any other way, either. If anything, Hinata's crying got worse. Naruto would have let go, possibly even gone to get a nurse. But now Hinata had somehow wrapped one of her arms around his back, exerting enough pressure to give Lee's turnip planting a run for its money. So instead he mostly just sat there, half twisted around, as the weeping sounds slowly abated. Hinata took a great, shuddering breath that suddenly exploded into a fit of coughing. She let go of his waist as she doubled over, but one hand was still holding onto his jacket, shaking as it held her up. Naruto twisted around and grabbed a cloth from the table, holding it out for Hinata to grab. She held it up to her mouth as the coughs made her whole body spasm. When she brought the cloth away from her mouth, Naruto saw a flash of red and wanted to kill her cousin all over again. But at least she was breathing easier now. Her voice was only a little rough when she quietly thanked him. Naruto helped her lay back on the bed and fussed with the covers, trying to straighten them. "Do I need to get a nurse?" he asked in a worried tone. "No," she answered in a small voice. "One of the Juken strikes hit my lung and caused a rupture. It's healing, but there are blood clots loosening. The doctor says the treatments are softening them as well, but coughing them up naturally is the best way to expel them." "Oh," Naruto said. That was really kind of gross. He wondered how Neji would like it if Naruto just pulled one of his lungs out through his nose. That would probably be even more disgusting though. Better think of something else before Hinata thought she was grossing him out. "I don't really understand what you have to be sorry for," he continued. Hinata went very still and Naruto wanted to kick himself. "I was very selfish," she said after a moment. When I fought Neji." Naruto scowled. "Don't worry, Hinata, I'm going to beat him like a drum." Hinata shook her head. "Kurenai-sensei is disappointed in me, "No way," Naruto interrupted. "You were great. You fought so hard, everyone was impressed. I loved it when you nailed him with one of your weights. He looked like he swallowed his tongue when you did that." "But I still failed," Hinata said, looking down at her hands clasped in front of her. Naruto could see her knuckles widening. "I was so ashamed of my failure I think I kept getting up when I had no chance to beat him because I would rather have been killed than lose again. I wasn't thinking about anyone but myself." Naruto stared at his friend as his mouth slowly fell open. "I wanted to let you know now in case," she swallowed. "In case Kurenai-sensei has me removed from the team." "No!" Naruto snarled. Hinata flinched, and her wide eyes snapped up to meet him. "I won't let her." "Naruto-kun!" Hinata gasped, and in the pale red glow on the blankets he realized that the red chakra was beginning to show. It seemed to be appearing more and more often lately, usually when he thought about the preliminary matches. Naruto took a deep breath and tried to calm himself. "I'll talk to Kurenai-sensei," he said after a moment. He was proud of the evenness of his tone. "I'll get Shino to help if I have to. No one wins an argument with him." Hinata shook her head. "No, it's all right." "No, it's not all right," Naruto said, some heat creeping back into his voice. "You're part of our team, and we're not going to just give up on you. You belong with us. We'll make her see that." With that, Naruto spun and marched out of the room. It was pretty rude, but he had to leave before he said something worse. How the hell could Kurenai-sensei say that to her? He took no note of the nurses and doctors as he left the hospital, though he did notice more than a few people hurrying to get out of his way. He supposed he shouldn't have been surprised to see his sensei standing just outside the entrance. "She told you," Kurenai said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, she did," Naruto spat. "Sensei, how could—" Kurenai cut him off with a sharp gesture. "This is better discussed elsewhere. Meet me at our normal training area," she ordered, and then disappeared in a puff of smoke. Naruto wouldn't have been surprised to learn that he'd set a new personal record for traversing the roofs of Konoha. It felt good, in a way, to exercise after what he'd just heard. Using his muscles as hard as he could give vent to at least some of his more violent emotions. Kurenai-sensei was standing in the middle of the clearing, so Naruto hurtled out of the trees to land next to her. She didn't even flinch, but began speaking even as he straightened up. You are upset about what you have learned, she began. Yes, sensei, Naruto agreed. How could you even think of threatening to remove her from the team? He asked. The sheer injustice of it all made his hands shake. He wanted to hate his teacher for a moment, but she wouldn't just do something like that for no reason, would she? Would you rather see Hinata removed from the team or dead? Kurenai asked flatly. Naruto froze. It's a very serious question, Kurenai continued. I wouldn't be free to discuss this if she hadn't already told you, but her behavior during the match gives me reason to be very concerned. Determination is all well and good, but such disregard for her own well-being is not acceptable. She just wanted to win, Naruto objected. She wanted to do her best in the exam. She practically dared her cousin to kill her, Kurenai disagreed. In a rank test, no lives were on the line. The village's safety was not at risk. But she considered her own survival unimportant. Naruto stood there, his sensei's words striking him like clubs. Thinking back over her match, he remembered wishing she'd stayed down as Niji continued to pummel her, until finally the older Hyuga had appeared ready to end her life before Naruto's substitution technique yanked her out of the way. He took a deep breath and looked up at the noonday sky. He thought back to a conversation he and Shino had shared in their tent during the border patrol mission. This has something to do with her screwed-up family, doesn't it? He finally asked. I'm fairly certain it does, Kurenai confirmed. Naruto made a face. He suddenly had a bad taste in his mouth. He spit on the grass. Do you really think she should be placed in life and death situations unless this is resolved? She asked. Naruto shook his head. What are you planning on doing? Kurenai asked as he began striding away. I don't know yet, was his honest answer. Naruto was a mess during his noontime session with Guy-sensei, and Lee nearly knocked him unconscious during their first spar. Eventually, Guy ended it early. Naruto apologized to the taijutsu specialist, but Guy merely waved it off. It is clear, he said in his booming voice, that the fires of your youth need to be banked, Naruto. Come back tomorrow when your mind and spirit are as one and you have regained your youthful focus. Naruto didn't know if Kurenai-sensei had said something to Guy-sensei or not, but he thought the green-clad was awfully optimistic about his problem-solving abilities. At the moment, he didn't have a clue as to what he should do. After a quick lunch, Naruto found himself sitting on top of the Hokage monument. He looked out over Konoha and thought about the situation. No matter how many times he tried, he just couldn't seem to wrap his head around the differences between how Hinata was and how she saw herself. She didn't really think she'd done that well in the preliminary match, but everyone who knew her was impressed by what they saw. Why was it so different? Eventually, he decided to head back and just ask her. It wasn't like his blundering mouth could make things any worse than they were. Naruto arrived back at the hospital just in time to see Shino walking out of the entrance. He immediately changed his plans and intercepted his teammate. You have spoken to Hinata, Shino said with no preamble. Naruto nodded. You? He asked. She has apologized to me as well for her thoughtlessness, Shino replied. Naruto didn't even need to look up to know the forehead over those dark glasses was furrowed. Remember what we talked about on the patrol mission? Naruto asked him. Shino nodded. That appears to be the most likely origin of our present situation. Naruto gritted his teeth. He knew better than most that Shino's emotionless voice was not an accurate gauge of his teammates' real feelings. So what are we going to do about it? He asked. Do? Shino asked. I am not sure this is a situation we are qualified to deal with. We can't do nothing, Naruto protested. Our instructor will undertake the proper corrective action, Shino said. There are professionals better equipped to deal with this situation than we are. They'd probably remove her from the team first, Naruto hissed, struggling to keep his voice down. That would kill her. Maybe for real. Shino just looked at him for a long moment. Naruto had learned how to tell, glasses or not. You are highly agitated about this, he said after a moment. This is Hinata, Naruto said. She's our teammate. We need to look out for her. We need to fix this. Not some assholes like the guy that tried to screw me up. Shino was silent for a long time. I have observed, he finally said after a while, that our teammate is highly affected by your words, including intonation as well as phraseology and context. Naruto blinked. She listens very closely to what you say, Shino clarified. You more than anyone. More than Kurenai-sensei? Naruto asked in stark disbelief. Why? More than anyone, Shino confirmed. It would be inappropriate for me to speculate regarding issues in which I do not have first-hand knowledge. But that is what I have observed. I believe that you would be best suited to interact with Hinata in an effort to satisfactorily resolve this situation. Damn, Naruto said. I was hoping she'd listen to you better. Shino went very still. And why is that? He asked. Because you're smarter than me, Naruto replied. I'll probably just make things worse. I do not believe that raw intelligence is the most important factor in resolving interpersonal issues, Shino declared. I theorize that if you simply ask questions and listen attentively, you will experience a greater degree of success than you anticipate. Hinata felt better after Shino left. He accepted her admission of selfishness without batting an eye, that she could see anyway, and stated that he too was impressed by her performance. Furthermore, he did not wish to see her removed from Team 8 either. He said her conduct and capabilities were well above average for their cohort, and the team's social interactions had proven to be more enjoyable than he had considered possible. He concluded that removing a key component from the matrix was neither necessary nor desirable. Hinata accepted his words as they were spoken. It wasn't like Shino to whitewash a situation just to be nice. He was too precise for that. But still, remembering the disappointment in Kurenai-sensei's voice seemed to sweep all that away. It was just the latest in a grand litany of failures. She wondered if she'd even be admitted back into the clan if she was rejected as a ninja. Probably not. She jumped a little when the door opened and Naruto walked in. She had to firmly clasp her hands to keep from pushing her fingertips together in her nervous habit. She was a little mortified when she remembered how she broke down in front of him earlier. At least she'd been able to maintain her composure around Shino. Naruto was silent as he carefully pulled up a chair and sat down next to her bed. She wanted to open her mouth, to say something, to apologize, to do something. But no words would come. Instead, she found herself staring at his face. No matter that it was rude and unmannerly, something her father would abhor, she just couldn't help it. Naruto, always so enthusiastic about everything, looked very different with such a somber expression. For a moment, she pictured him in the Hokage's robes again and felt a chill go down her spine. There's a lot going on here that I don't understand, Naruto began, jolting Hinata out of her reverie. I'm used to not knowing things. But now I can't accept that. I don't understand how you can see yourself so differently than everyone else sees you. I don't understand why you. He paused and swallowed. Why do you seem to hate yourself? Something is not right. Hinata looked down. She didn't need Naruto to tell her she was defective. An unpleasant voice in the back of her mind said that it was about time Naruto saw the truth of things. Now maybe she will stop wasting her time. Motion caught her eye and she looked up to see Naruto leaning forward, peering intently at her. He cocked his head in a manner eerily reminiscent of their sensei. And I do not think that something is you, Hyuga Hinata, he said, imitating Kurenai-sensei when she wanted to make a point. Hinata froze, her mouth halfway open, the protests dying on her tongue as bright blue eyes bored into hers. I was an orphan, Naruto said after a moment, leaning back in his chair. I don't really know what it's like to have a family, but I always wanted one. I always wondered what it would be like to have parents, or a brother or sister. Maybe I had some idealized image of family, because I knew I'd never have one. Shino's parents seemed kind of neat. But now I'm starting to wonder if I might have been better off in some ways. Naruto's words tore at Hinata. She knew how lonely he'd been at times in the past. She knew now that he was ostracized because of the seal he bore. Naruto Tell me about the Hyugas, Naruto said, his tone gentle but firm. Hinata found she could deny him nothing. She began speaking. Naruto left the hospital 2 hours later, his head spinning. He felt like he'd sat through one of Kurenai's mega lectures, only less organized. He'd had a glance into the life of one of Konoha's most prestigious clans, but he didn't really like what he saw. The factual details were interesting. He had no idea there were that many feast days recognized in the Land of Fire, many of which required some sort of formal dinner. He had no idea the Hyuga compound was as large as it was, and that there were several buildings set farther back in the grounds for the branch family. Tea ceremonies sounded weird, but boring after you sat through your first one. Maybe Hinata was graceful enough to make it interesting to watch. But it was the things that were missing that made him wonder. Shikamaru was always telling stories about his dad saying or doing something troublesome. Kiba always complained about his big sister trying to boss him around. But Hinata didn't really have any stories about her father or her sister. She had a few pleasant recollections of her mother that faded with age, but those only highlighted the lack with respect to her still living family members. As far as he could tell, Hinata avoided them as much as possible, and none of them seemed to ever have a kind word for her. But the real eye-opener came after Hinata had another coughing fit. As she wiped her mouth and drank a little water, Naruto muttered darkly about how he was going to kill Neji at the finals. Hinata immediately began pleading with him not to, which puzzled Naruto. At first, he thought she was just being too nice. Then he thought she was just worried about him getting in trouble. Then the truth came out, and it stunk like an open grave. To get at the heart of it, Hinata had to go back all the way to when she was almost a baby. She vaguely remembered her uncle Hisashi, Niji's father, who acted very differently than his twin brother. She remembered seeing her father hurt him once using the curse seal, and had to explain how the branch family members were branded with it on their foreheads to keep them under the control of the Hyuga main family. It took a moment for Naruto to digest this. More than a moment, actually. The branch family members were, in some ways, little better than slaves of the main family. He felt a twinge of sympathy for Niji that he ruthlessly extinguished. Then Hinata told him about the kidnapping attempt that ended with her father killing the assailant, who turned out to be a diplomat from Kumokage. Kumo demanded the life of the killer, but Hyuga elders sent Hisashi in his brother's place, leaving Niji fatherless. Later, with his mother dead as well, Niji was informally adopted by his uncle and trained along with his daughters. But the boy was always cool toward those who controlled the seal placed on his forehead. Niji turned out to be unusually talented, Hinata told him, which was painfully ironic given his birth into the branch family. The main family was supposed to be stronger and more skilled, but he quite obviously overshadowed Hinata even years ago when she was the heir. He wondered as she spoke if this tension was related to other things as well. Maybe Hinata wasn't as skilled as Niji, but she was still pretty damn good at what she did. Why did they have to label her as a failure? Naruto wondered if her father resented Hinata in some way related to that whole mess, blaming her for the loss of his brother. It was stupid, but he couldn't think of anything else. He was about to ask her when the nurse entered the room and coolly informed him that visiting hours were over. Now he found himself walking aimlessly through the streets of Konoha, pondering a problem that he wasn't sure had a solution. He really needed to talk to someone, but he didn't feel right discussing what Hinata had told him. It was private. Her telling him that stuff, it was really a measure of the trust she placed in him. She was hesitant enough telling him. Naruto was sure she'd be really embarrassed if someone else knew, and he didn't want to make her feel worse. Naruto was thinking so hard that he didn't even notice Iruka calling out to him until the Chunin's hand fell on his shoulder. Startled, Naruto spun around, making Iruka stumble back. While he was well enough to help with the Chunin exam, Naruto's old instructor was still recovering from the serious injuries he'd sustained battling the missing Nin kidnappers. Without thinking, Naruto grabbed Iruka's wrist to steady him. Iruka halted in mid-stumble, much to his apparent surprise. "That's quite a grip you have there, Naruto," he said in a pleased voice. He smiled. "Want some ramen? My treat?" Naruto started to apologize, but then remembered that Gai-sensei had given him the rest of the day off. "Sure, Iruka-sensei. Weighty problems or not, ramen was ramen." It was a little early for the dinner rush, so they found Ichiraku's mostly unoccupied. "Eat all you want," Iruka said in a grand voice. Naruto looked over at one of the first people to really believe in him. "Are you sure you're all right, Iruka-sensei?" "I made a lot of money off of you at the preliminary matches," Iruka informed him with an uncharacteristically smug grin. "When your match with Sasuke was announced, I made as many bets as I could before it started, and most of the Chunin, and gave me 10-to-1 odds. You should have seen their faces when you won." Naruto was a little annoyed that people had been so sure Sasuke would beat him, but for the most part he was happy for Iruka. People that believed in Uzumaki Naruto, future Hokage, should profit from it, especially at the expense of those who didn't. "If I'd known you were making bets, I'd have asked you to place some for me," he said sourly. Maybe go a little slower so you'd have time to place more. Iruka chuckled and reached over to muss Naruto's hair. That gesture still made Naruto swallow heavily, which was the reason why Iruka was the only one he'd let get away with it. Don't worry, I had enough time to wager all my back wages from when I was in the hospital. Naruto felt his face redden. It meant something that Iruka, who was ordinarily very practical with expenditures, was willing to bet that much on him. I wish I'd been able to get in on that action, Old Man Ichiraka said as he handed them a couple of menus. I imagine there will be a lot of wagering on the finals, Iruka said as they placed their orders. True, the old man said, but now everyone knows not to underestimate Naruto here, so the odds won't be as good. Naruto could almost feel his head beginning to swell at those words. Only the thought of Kurenai-sensei's probable reaction kept his ego firmly under control. Those thoughts were quickly dispelled by Tsuchi's next question. Is this Neji character Naruto has to fight next the one who beat Hinata? Naruto was fairly proud of his self-control. Not a word left his lips. Not a muscle moved in his face. It was just a coincidence that his chopsticks chose that moment to explode into a cloud of splinters. Iruka shot a quick glance at Naruto before answering. Yes, he hurt her pretty badly, he said quickly. Oh, the old ramen cook said, looking back and forth between Naruto and Iruka as the broth began to simmer. How is she doing? He asked with an uneasy expression. Better, Naruto said flatly. Is she allowed to have visitors now? Iruka asked, seeming eager to change the subject. Naruto nodded. She started today, he said. Good, Iruka said with a smile. I'll have to drop in and see how she's doing. She'd like that, Naruto said. He didn't add that she probably wouldn't have any visits from her family. The conversation lapsed into a semi-comfortable silence as the old man prepared their orders. The ramen was as good as ever, but somehow it didn't taste quite right to Naruto. After his first bowl, Naruto sat back on the stool and glanced over at Iruka, who also seemed kind of quiet. Sensei? He asked after a moment, have you ever had students who had problems? Naruto struggled with how to do this. He needed to keep things as vague as possible to avoid giving away Hinata's secrets, but if he made them too general his questions would become meaningless. All my students have problems, Iruka assured him with a grin. Naruto had no doubt he was at the top of that particular list. I mean problems at home. Iruka looked thoughtful. You mean with a family member? Naruto shrugged. Or maybe problems with their family in general. I never had one, so I was just curious. The excuse at the end was probably unnecessary, but he wasn't taking any chances. Iruka didn't seem overly curious, so maybe it was working. That can be tough, Iruka said thoughtfully. Usually, there really isn't anything we can do about the family, so I just try to make school as much of a haven as possible. Naruto looked confused. Iruka drank the last of his broth. Sometimes, if there is a lot of stress in the home, a student may find coming to class a welcome relief from that stress. If I think they don't really have anyone in their family they can talk to about their problems, I make sure they know that they can talk to me. Do they? Naruto asked, genuinely curious. He thought about how Iruka always seemed to be the one who supervised when he was forced to clean up the results of one of his pranks. The odd question now and then just seemed a way to ease his boredom, but now Naruto had a feeling there was more to it. This looking underneath could be fun. When it didn't give him a headache. Sometimes, Iruka said philosophically. There really isn't anything you can do to force the situation, you have to just let them know help is available and wait for them to ask for it. That kind of sucks, Naruto said, wrinkling his nose. Beating the crap out of Hinata's family sounded like a much better idea. The only problem was that he didn't think it would help. It does, Iruka said, turning toward him. It's awkward and it's frustrating, and often you feel like an idiot wasting your time. But you keep trying because it's important. That's it? Naruto asked. You just make yourself available and hope they ask for help? He needed something more active, or he was likely to go nuts. Well, Iruka drawled, you can try to make them feel as comfortable as possible. I always think, when in doubt, do the friendliest thing. Sometimes little things mean more than you realize, and even little things can add up eventually. Naruto was quiet for a while as he digested this. Did you ever get the urge to go to their home and start knocking heads together? he finally asked. Irika's sudden laughter startled them both. Most of the time, he admitted after a moment. Not that it would do any good. The next morning, Naruto showed up for his morning session with Guy, and Lee was determined to make up for his pitiful performance the day before. Instead of waiting for Lee to tire out, Naruto did his best to fight him to a standstill from the very beginning. Even as he accumulated a new set of bruises, Naruto chided himself for getting lazy. He'd gotten so used to his normal strategy with Lee that he wasn't pushing himself as hard as he could. It also helped to have a way to vent the previous day's frustrations. Lee's grin got wider and wider as Naruto continued to go on the offensive, and his taijutsu combinations became more and more elaborate. After a while, Lee was doing things Naruto had never seen before, forcing him to block and counter on pure instinct. He realized after a moment that this was surprisingly fun. Right up until Lee broke a bone in his forearm. Naruto was blocking a punch to the face that suddenly turned into an off-angle kick intended to remove his head. There was a loud crack, accompanied by a jolt of pain that made Naruto's whole arm go numb for a moment. Naruto stumbled back, clutching his forearm. It was hot to the touch, but the blinding pain was already leaking away. Lee looked horrified, so Naruto just gave him a tight grin. "Good one," he said after a moment, letting go of his arm and flexing his hand. The pain was little more than a dull ache now. He stepped forward to resume sparring, but Guy-sensei was having none of that. He'd evidently heard the crack as well, and insisted that Naruto have his arm x-rayed immediately. On the way to the hospital, he explained the best way to counter Lee's move, even as he chastised his genin for letting the fires of his youth burn out of control. Lee looked so disconsolate that Naruto spoke without thinking. "That's okay. After all, I don't think Niji is going to take it easy on me." Both of the spandex-clad shinobi looked distinctly uncomfortable, and Naruto cursed his stupid mouth. They were silent the rest of the way to the emergency room. The doctors were less than enthusiastic about treating Naruto, especially since he didn't seem to be in too much pain, but Guy was insistent. The X-rays revealed only a faint shadow on the ulna that looked to be a hairline fracture that had healed long before. The medic looked annoyed at Guy for wasting his time, but Guy just explained that Naruto had taken a heavy blow while fanning the fires of his youth, and fulfilling his youthful promise to Naruto's instructor meant making sure there was no serious damage. The doctor's eyes glazed over halfway through this explanation, and he didn't even notice when Guy took the X-ray with him. Naruto stared at as he and Lee followed him out of the hospital. Did he do that on purpose sometimes? By the time they returned to the training area, it was almost time for the morning session to be over anyway. Guy had them do a couple of kata before beginning the cool-down exercises. After he was dismissed, Naruto created some clones and then stopped by the Yamanaka flower shop to purchase a cluster of yellow chrysanthemum flowers. During his conversation with Hinata, he noticed that her room didn't seem to have a single card or decoration. While she'd only just been cleared for visitors, he knew her worthless family wouldn't be bothered to do anything to cheer her up. He shook his head. No matter what his opinion was, he didn't need to be ranting about them to Hinata. She knew what he thought, and getting too angry would only upset her. When he returned to the hospital, arriving through the visitor's entrance this time, Naruto marched straight to Hinata's room and knocked on the door. He didn't want to give the nurse that kicked him out yesterday time to come up with an excuse for why he couldn't see his friend. He could feel a couple of glares aimed in his direction, but just ignored them. If Hinata had to put up with all that crap from her family, what did he have to complain about? "Yes? Come in." Maybe it was his imagination, but her voice seemed to be a little stronger today. He shifted the flowers so he was holding them behind his back. "Good morning, Hinata-chan," Naruto announced brightly as he opened the door and walked in. She was indeed looking less pale than the day before, and she seemed to be moving a little easier as she sat up. Surely if her face was that pink, her circulation must be improving as well. "And Naruto-kun," she said, sounding surprised. That bothered Naruto, just a little bit. With a flourish, Naruto pulled the flowers from behind his back and placed them on the table. "I thought this place could use a little color," he explained. "They'd be beautiful," Hinata said in a choked voice. "I'm glad you like them," Naruto replied as he walked over to the window and opened it. The clones standing on the wall outside climbed in with their burdens. "Guy said that was a good book on Goken katas and combinations," Naruto explained. And I got ramen for both of us this time. Kurenai-sensei still had your bag and I figured there was some stuff in there that you might want, so she let me bring it. It took a moment for Naruto to unpack the ramen. When he looked up, Hinata was staring at him, clutching her bag and with the book sitting in her lap. What? He asked. Hinata shook her head for a moment. Why are you doing all this? She asked, an uncertain tone creeping into her voice like a thief in the night. Naruto hated that painful way she had second-guessed herself. He vowed to do his best to kill it. I just wanted to have lunch with my best friend, he explained as he handed her a steaming bowl. Thanks for watching. I hope you had as much fun as I did putting this epic what if together. Make sure to smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a single twist in the story. Drop your thoughts, theories, or even wild ideas in the comments. I read every single one. And hey, if you're craving more awesome Naruto content, go check out the other videos on the channel. I've got plenty of heat waiting for you. Until next time, stay sharp, stay awesome, and remember, even a shadow clone needs love. Peace out.